In 2025, we got easily the strangest, messiest season of South Park in the show's near 30-year history. And honestly, that still almost feels like an understatement. There were like 50 different things about this set of 10 episodes that were completely unprecedented for the series, and while there was plenty to love about this run, it has left much of the fanbase relatively divided. And following along over the course of these last 4.5 months was a unique experience as well, as so much about the story and production felt wholly unpredictable. This video is two things. It's a compilation of all 10 of my breakdowns from this year's set of episodes, as well as a sort of post-mortem of South Park season 27/28. I think following the progress of these breakdowns, from the excitement and shock of the season premiere to the cautiously optimistic exhaustion of the season finale, seeing exactly how the season kept us guessing and what we got right and wrong along the way is pretty fascinating. If you've already seen these 10 breakdowns and aren't interested in rewatching, the last chunk of the video will be a new breakdown on all the ways these 10 episodes were so unique and unprecedented for South Park. If that's you, there will be time codes in the description so you can skip around. So without further ado, let's dive into that first breakdown from back in July on the season premiere, Sermon on the Mount. So, South Park's first regular episode in over 2 years is finally aired, and my god, dude, I sat stunned for a good 30 minutes after that thing finished. Season 27's premiere, Sermon on the Mount, is, without question, the most insane thing South Park has ever done in their entire run, and I do not think that's hyperbole. On the heels of Trump suing CBS/Paramount, Colbert getting canceled for criticizing their settlement/bribe, and Matt and Trey signing a historically massive contract with Paramount, they're basically daring the President of the United States to sue them. South Park is so back, dude. Let's get into it. Okay, so besides all of the Trump/Paramount stuff, which is clearly the headline of the episode, this thing also has a ton of metatextual commentary about South Park's place in our current culture. It's referencing back to major aspects of South Park history and is basically cleaning up lore so that they can keep Mr. Garrison in South Park. So before we dive into the genuine insanity of the diabolical maneuvers that Matt and Trey have made with Trump and Paramount, let's talk about the other aspects of the episode. A large chunk of the story focuses on Cartman lamenting the fact that woke culture has seemed to have severely diminished or died off since the last election, which is a very funny subversion of what you'd expect from Cartman, but it also highlights a very funny aspect of Cartman's character. He isn't just an awful little shithead, he's also incredibly selfish and self-aggrandizing about this fact. He likes being the awful little contrarian bigot because it makes him feel special and different from everyone else. Genuinely so funny to make Cartman upset about NPR's funding getting cut just because he thought listening to that brand of liberal media was hilarious. You got a kick out of hearing liberals whine. It's very Cartman. But this entire aspect of the episode is obviously saying just as much about the state of South Park as it is Cartman. South Park's satire is often built around Cartman representing a lot of the most hateful, egregious views out there. But when a lot of those ideas that felt extreme have become more accepted and mainstream, how can you satirize those viewpoints in the same way? Maybe you aren't on Twitter, and if not, good for you, but let me tell you, the last couple of years there has been a huge rise in incredibly hateful people showcasing clips of Cartman's ignorant viewpoints as though the show is actually supporting those viewpoints, commenting something stupid like, "South Park is so based for this, bro," when in reality, the context is often that Cartman is taking things to a completely unacceptable extreme. Cartman is typically the butt of the joke. He's almost never portrayed as being in the right. So this entire storyline isn't just Cartman questioning his place in the culture, but Matt and Trey questioning how South Park fits in when their brand of satire is increasingly blending in with the real shit we're seeing in the world. Why does Cartman need to exist when the world is full of Cartmans? God, Cartman walking around the town sadly with the woke is dead shirt is on, it's too funny. I think there's actually even more metatextual commentary with this entire subplot with Butters here, but we'll get to that later. The one person Cartman counted on to keep woke woke alive was, of course, PC Principal, and this was another small subplot that I really enjoyed. PC Principal is revealed to have changed his name to Power Christian Principal, PC Principal for short. He is just a full-on, born-again Christian, and his aggressive frat bro attitude is preaching the word of the Lord now, which is shockingly just as funny. I found this really interesting from both a commentary and character perspective. It's kind of rad that we've had PC Principal around for so long now that we can have this huge character change be a shocking status quo shift when he initially started as this admittedly funny one-note character. Like, PC Principal introducing Jesus is not funny without the context of 8 seasons of regular PC Principal.
I'd like you all to put your hands together in welcoming Christ our Lord.
God, it's kind of crazy that he's been around for 8 seasons already. But commentary-wise, I feel like this is sort of ripping on the kinds of people that are so weak-willed that they kind of just follow the culture no matter where it goes, without any real ideals or beliefs that hold them down. Like, PC Principal could not have been a more aggressive warrior of woke, and yet here he has completely given up and is now eradicating the lines between church and state to inject Christian values into the classroom. Obviously, it's a very extreme example of a pendulum swing, but maybe PC Principal will sort of be the embodiment of the cultural moment in the show. That might be a fun way to shake things up with him, as long as he's always an aggressive frat bro. Bringing Jesus back to South Park is also, on another metatextual level, representative of the show going back to its roots. Jesus used to be a huge character. He just lived in South Park until he died in Iraq, and the show has often sort of examined itself within each cultural moment it exists. Season 19 comes to mind as a time where South Park was really looking at all of the remnants of what the show used to be and how they exist in an increasingly PC culture, and we got some truly great episodes navigating older characters in newer narratives. Now, with this bit of a pendulum swing back, it seems like they're sort of saying, okay, we're gonna regress a little too. We'll bring back Jesus. We're gonna have some side characters say very egregious things because people are saying more egregious things. And the people of South Park are actually weirdly united in this episode, which I'd say is a pretty unique scenario since this show often highlights cultural conflict. Randy is pretty upset that Jesus is just hanging out at South Park Elementary.
I don't think Jesus is allowed to be in schools.
I also loved that the extent of Jesus being in school was mostly just him standing there as people passed by, but the entire town is pretty upset that the new president has ushered in these changes, which also leads to a lot of characters really second-guessing their own place in all of this.
Yeah, I voted for him, but all I've seen him do is arrest and sue people.
If you've been following the show for a while, you'll know that they sort of lost Garrison in the role of their Trump surrogate for his first term, and that they've been pretty clear about not really wanting to lose regular Garrison again. There's a great season 26 episode all about it, and I knew they'd do something to keep Garrison, but I kind of expected that they would just ignore all of it, keep Garrison in town, and not really address the current administration. In fact, last year they claimed that they were so sick of covering Trump that one of the reasons they skipped out on a new season during the election was to avoid covering him and the election in general. They were very clear about this.
So that was a fucking lie.
Okay, so I don't actually think this was a full-on lie. I do think they're sick of it, but obviously they went crazier than they ever have with the Trump stuff in this episode, which is saying a lot. And I think there's a very clear reason for that. A clear reason why they feel their hand may have been forced a little bit, and it definitely has to do with this whole Paramount debacle. For one, let's talk about the fact that Trump is Saddam Hussein now. Just portrayed the exact same way down to the relationship with Satan.
You remind me more and more of this other guy I used to date. Like, a lot.
Now, I think this is once again an example of the show sort of going back to its roots. Saddam was the main antagonist of the South Park movie. He was a huge part of the show back in the day. And here they've gone with that old school method, using real photos of Trump and giving him the flappy head treatment. Something we really haven't seen from them in years. But there is a clear reason that Matt and Trey went scorched earth on Trump in this episode. The episode not only likens Trump directly to Saddam Hussein through their own show's history, and puts him in bed with Satan, but it portrays him as an unhinged, tiny-dicked lunatic who threatens to sue literally everybody. They didn't even need to bring up the Epstein list. I mean, they did, but it seemed like kind of an afterthought. Even the style of humor here is more old school South Park. It's much crasser and more cartoony, just a complete caricature. And yes, they are clearly making fun of Trump genuinely, but here's the thing, this is bait. They are baiting our president into responding to a cartoon. And You know he will. Matt and Trey are basically daring Trump to sue Paramount, but the context and circumstance surrounding this move make it truly diabolical, so let me give some context. If you don't know, Paramount has been poised to merge with the company Skydance for some time. However, that process has been stifled and delayed. During the previous election cycle, Paramount-owned CBS aired a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris that was pretty heavily edited. If you know anything about interviews, especially television interviews, they're edited. All of them. But the fact that they didn't make this clear or release the full transcript immediately led to Donald Trump suing 60 Minutes, claiming election interference for this dishonest editing. Now, realistically, Trump probably would not have won this lawsuit. However, mysteriously, the FCC seemed to hold up the Skydance Paramount merger while this lawsuit was happening. This led to Paramount settling with Trump for $16 million in a move that looked, we'll say, politically motivated, almost like a bribe to prevent the FCC from blocking the merger. After this happened, Stephen Colbert called out his parent company, also CBS/Paramount, for the shady-looking settlement, and would you believe that a couple days later, Paramount announced The Late Show with Stephen Colbert would be canceled after their current contract ends, despite being the highest-rated late-night show on the air. Now, South Park also got swept up in this drama, and Matt and Trey were not happy about it. Basically, the delay of this merger led to major delays in the production and release of South Park, and also in the renegotiating of their streaming contract. Things got very heated. They even released this statement when the show was delayed. "This merger is a shit show and it's f***ing up South Park. We are at the studio working on new episodes and we hope the fans get to see them somehow." They basically claimed that the incoming regime from Skydance was interfering with their negotiations for their new streaming deal, and they even began the litigation process to potentially sue that incoming regime. But earlier this week, negotiations got back on track and they reached a new agreement for both a 5-year streaming contract worth $1.5 billion, as well as a new overall deal for 5 more years and 50 more episodes of South Park. These contracts basically completed the day before this episode aired. And so, less than a week after Paramount canceled Colbert for calling out their deal with Trump, Matt and Trey have signed one of the biggest deals in Hollywood history with Paramount, and their first move, literally same day, is to attack Trump on levels that Colbert could never have even conceived of. Plus, they directly called out Paramount, portraying 60 Minutes as this terrified husk of a news program that kowtows to the ego of the president every step of the way.
The townspeople claim that the president, who is a great man.
A great man.
Great guy.
They basically had Jesus hushedly and directly call out Paramount and say what everyone fears, that if we've got a literal president who also throws tantrums and gets his way by suing everybody, then they probably should just throw in the towel.
If someone has the power of the presidency and also has the power to sue and take bribes, then he can do anything to anyone.
Jesus directly says that if they don't stop this, South Park is probably over. So by airing this episode, the day after signing billions of dollars worth of contracts, they've basically maneuvered Paramount into the crosshairs, fully expecting Trump to retaliate. This is, without question, the most insane thing South Park has ever done. It's one of the most insane things that has ever happened in television history, especially given the end of this episode, which features a full-on Donald Trump deepfake wandering the desert naked, ending with him exposing himself. I had no words at the end of this episode. They basically said, what is the furthest we can go to ensure that Trump will respond to this? And then they just did it. I don't even understand how this made it on the air. I am shocked that Paramount let this air. But Matt and Trey basically put every protection in place they could to make this a huge battle if it's going to go down. They made sure that those contracts got signed before the new episode dropped. They made sure there was no easy way for Paramount to just drop them if and when Trump goes on the attack. And Trump's retaliation, given that he controls the FCC, could mean further complications for the Paramount/Skydance merger. It could blow the whole thing entirely. Matt and Trey not only gave a giant middle finger to Trump, but to Paramount and Skydance, and threw a huge wrench in their massive corporate merger. And this is what fully puts the whole Cartman and Butters subplot into context. Cartman basically makes a suicide pact with Butters and says if things don't go back to normal by like Tuesday, they've got to end it all. Cartman is basically saying this might be the end of South Park. It might be over. The act of making this episode is essentially Matt and Trey's attempt. And that's exactly why the final shot of the episode is Cartman and Butters sitting in the car. Cartman, played by Trey, Butters, played by Matt, saying, if this is it, this is it.
I think I might be going.
Yep, sweet death is about to come.
I love you, man.
What a ride. Now, obviously there's a lot more to talk about and speculate about for the coming season, but that is of course only if there is a season actually coming now. It's clear that Matt and Trey are at least operating under the impression that it's possible that this is the end. There's really no other real explanation for that final line, and honestly, if that's the case, what a way to go out, right? Like, what if we are living in a world where this was the final South Park episode? Matt and Trey have long said that they expect the only way for South Park to end is for it to be forced off the air, and this is absolutely the furthest they've gone to test those limits. Knowing what Paramount just did with Colbert, knowing the lawsuits Trump has been slinging left and right, I don't know, man, this could get crazy. But in case this isn't the end, let's talk about the rest of the season and what this episode is set up. Unusually, they seem to have worked on a lot of season 27 already, which is likely a result of their studio getting dicked around by the Paramount Skydance merger. It sounds like they had produced a special for early in the year, and that special is likely getting converted into episodes for the season. But we know they have a ton already animated from the trailer that dropped a couple months ago, and we know lots about what those storylines might entail. It seems like they've planted the seeds for at least one of them here in this episode, and it also seems like a lot of the other plots could easily stem from what we've seen here. The episode showed Saddam Trump be confronted by the Prime Minister of Canada over tariffs, and the trailer showed a full-on war with Canada, literally invading the US. It seems clear that this storyline could escalate into that, but also this is a pretty fitting storyline given the history of South Park. Garrison Trump literally nuked Toronto, and of course the Canadian-American War broke out during the film Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, which also obviously heavily featured Saddam Hussein. It was interesting to see Satan again here after he had previously died and gone to heaven. I was hoping we might actually see Satan in heaven at some point, but they clearly just wanted to harken back to the South Park movie here. And I think Satan's dialogue referencing that Trump is like Saddam begs the question, are they actually going to reveal that this is Saddam Hussein in disguise, or are they going to stick with the characterization just being identical? The last we saw Saddam, he was actually trying to control Canada, so there's lots of connective tissue possibilities here. The trailer also shows French Canadians tearing down the Statue of Liberty, definitely referencing the French lawmaker who earlier this year facetiously asked the US to return the Statue of Liberty since they no longer uphold its values. There are also tons of plane crashes in the trailer, obviously referencing the disasters and air traffic control firings earlier in the year. These are all storylines that could easily stem from this new version of Trump within the show, which also kind of makes it feel like there's going to be some major serialized aspects to the season, which I think probably comes as a disappointment to some fans, given that those seasons were very hit or miss. However, the fact that so much of this season is seemingly in place already, and that they still have these next 10 weeks to adjust and fine-tune everything, it kind of has me excited about the prospect of this season being more connected and serialized. They actually have a bit more flexibility to maneuver stories around this time, whereas the obvious pitfall from like season 20 was that they did not have the time or flexibility to meaningfully adjust the story when they needed to. Matt and Trey also have a Comic-Con appearance literally the day I am releasing this video, and I think everybody is pretty eagerly awaiting what they have to say, especially after this episode, and especially if Trump responds before they go on stage, which feels very possible. Honestly, I'm probably gonna have to make a follow-up video at some point, and that might be here on the main channel, or it might be over on my more topical channel, Johnny Too Casual, but I'll be following the fallout from this episode closely for sure. Honestly, I've been covering South Park for like a decade, and nothing could have prepared me for this episode. I was shocked. Like, the maneuvering and behind-the-scenes drama feels like the most impressive Cartman schemes we've ever seen, except this shit is actually real. I really hope there's a new episode next week, and if there is, I will be covering it, but for now, we gotta wait and see how these dominoes fall. This is truly kind of unprecedented. Well, South Park Season 27 followed up its massive premiere from 2 weeks ago with another incredibly topical, hot-button episode focused on Debate Bro podcasters, ice, and Kristi Noem shooting puppies. And honestly, this thing was non-stop gags and biting commentary. I really felt like most of the way through, this was just another incredibly strong episode, but boy, did it have a weird, abrupt ending. There is tons to go over with this one, as per usual, so let's dive into Season 27, Episode 2, Got a Nut. Okay, so South Park Studios opted to take 2 weeks for their second episode of the season after their premiere made such huge waves, and while the episode overall was really strong, I'm really surprised that they landed on this ending with that extra production time. But you can also see how much of that extra time went into the production value, because they had some amazing looking locations and sequences. The episode starts with the boys complaining about somebody making inflammatory remarks on their debating podcast about women, Jews, etc., clearly alluding to Cartman before the show reveals that it's actually Clyde. The entire school seems to be up in arms, and fittingly they have Wendy and Kyle confront Clyde to complain.
Well, that sounds like a very female-led Jew thing to say. If you guys don't like it, why don't you come debate me on my podcast?
This follows up the previous episode's Cartman storyline pretty directly, where he felt very lost given how much of the world is more or less repeating his shtick these days. He no longer feels special. And that's exactly how he's feeling here, seeing Clyde take his place as the offensive provocateur who's getting all the attention for it. Particularly the attention of Kyle, might I add. One of the things that sets Cartman off is hearing Kyle call Clyde a fat ass. There's almost like a jealousy here. This leads to Cartman basically playing catch-up with people like Clyde to adopt these debate bro tactics to try and stay relevant, even though Clyde has ripped Cartman's talking points and just repackaged them.
And also be sure to hashtag respect Clyde's authority. What?
So Clyde and Cartman are obviously parodying this specific type of debate bro, a tactic we've seen used pretty heavily for years now, and the episode does not really hold back when it comes to how it feels about these specific types of personalities and influencers. Clyde is basically hawking protein supplement to make money, and he fully states that the only reason he's even doing any of this is to make money, or the way he puts it, because he's got a nut, which is about $60 a week, might I add. In his conversation with Mackie, he seems to have absolutely no real connection or belief in the ideology he's pushing. It's actually a pretty simple formula. Bring people on the podcast to debate, edit the content to be as incendiary as possible, meant to infuriate and divide, get eyeballs on that content through that division, and make money. And I'm sure you've come across this kind of debate bro content before on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, etc. Interestingly, they make Cartman the Charlie Kirk stand-in here, and I think that was pretty intentional. Charlie Kirk is another one of these right-wing political commentators, and while he does use debate bro tactics like this, he also absolutely believes in the ideology he peddles, just like Cartman does, so this is pretty fitting. But as usual, the show is not making Cartman out to be a good guy here, obviously. They fully spell out for the audience exactly what he's doing to find success in this format.
I have my arguments down rock solid. These young college girls are totally unprepared, so I can just destroy them and also edit out all the ones that actually argue back well.
I like that this season seems to really be leaning into a good mix of actual political commentary and like incredibly stupid juvenile humor. Obviously last week it felt like all of the Trump's tiny junk stuff was very intentionally trying to get a rise out of him, but this week the whole master debating bit was just clear juvenile wordplay, and I can't pretend it didn't make me laugh.
I'm sorry, Mom. You told me to go to sleep, but I started master debating again.
But the other major piece of political and cultural commentary here was obviously the focus on ICE. Early in the episode, Mackie gets fired due to the far-reaching budget cuts in education across the country, and despite it completely conflicting with his principles, in order to make ends meet, Mackie decides to join ICE. South Park has obviously covered ICE before. Back in season 23's Mexican Joker, their detainment camps were a major focus, but with the recent insane inflation of their budget and the fact that they are actively carrying out raids across major US cities in ways that have been highly publicized and criticized, it makes sense that South Park would tackle them again, and they definitely do not hold back in their portrayal of ICE either.
If you're crazy or fat and lazy, we don't care at all.
Obviously, first off here, they're just incredibly critical of their hiring practices and lack of meaningful screening protocols. It was pretty funny to see that World of Warcraft guy return for the first time since like season 20 to represent their low standards here. And it does feel like their standards just keep lowering. In fact, literally yesterday, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem announced that they no longer have age limits in their recruiting for ICE enforcement positions. And we'll get to Kristi Noem soon because they definitely covered Kristi Noem in this episode. But also, South Park has just fully been dunking on Homeland Security. Okay, so here's a sentence that really perfectly exemplifies that we probably live in the dumbest timeline. On Tuesday, South Park ratioed Homeland Security on Twitter. Yeah, that's a real sentence. That's a thing that happened. The official Department of Homeland Security Twitter, the agency of the United States government, shared an image of South Park's ICE agents on their page, and South Park responded with this quote tweet. Wait, so we are relevant? Hashtag eat a bag of dicks. That quote tweet nearly 10x'd Homeland Security and was obviously in reference to the White House's assertion that South Park hadn't been relevant in 20 years. And obviously South Park was not subtle in their criticism of ICE in this episode either. They portray one of the raids as taking place at a live Dora the Explorer stage show. It's just a bunch of families enjoying children's entertainment, and ICE shows up to detain, deport, and rip these families apart. And South Park's message here is pretty clear that ICE is not just targeting the quote-unquote worst of the worst as their Secretary of Homeland Security claims they are. And if families watching Dora the Explorer wasn't subtle enough for that message, the next raid makes it pretty unambiguous.
I have no doubt that there are many, many Latinos in heaven.
Yeah, ICE rolls up on heaven. Again, not very subtle, but absolutely and obviously scathing. They are flat out saying that ICE's goals are to deport as many people as possible, no matter the context of their life or quality of their character, even if they are literally in heaven.
Remember, only detain the brown ones.
And this episode is not kind to Kristi Noem either, nor should it be. They took aim at her in two specific ways outside of her being this bizarre ICE mascot. But the first was in response to something she wrote about in her memoir. In maybe one of the most bizarre political moves I've ever heard of in my life, she detailed how she shot one of her hunting dogs because it wouldn't behave. Like, she wrote this story about her life as though it was an anecdote that made her relatable. She basically failed to train a dog so disastrously that she opted to murder it. And so, as you might expect, South Park shows Kristi Noem killing like 5 puppies over the course of this episode, including Crypto. Hope Soup doesn't find out. There's also this whole body horror subplot where Noem's face keeps melting and trying to escape her body, only for this group of stylists to come and touch her up as often as needed, which I feel like is not just ripping on Noem, but also commentary on the way that they're basically trying to give these kinds of government agencies marketing facelifts, make them look shiny and appealing. Cartman's story sort of just dissolves in this one, though in a pretty funny way. He loses the Charlie Kirk Award for master debating to Clyde, who wins a trip to Mar-a-Lago. I really liked how fully fed up Leanne was with all of this. I feel like over the past few seasons, we've been seeing her become more and more fed up with Eric's antics, and it's nice to see that character evolution. She used to sort of just be the yes mom archetype, and similar to Clyde, Mackie ends up being such a good ICE agent despite not even believing in the work he's doing that he ends up being honored by the president at Mar-a-Lago to become the new face of ICE. Honestly, while I did really think the ICE commentary was well handled here, from a story perspective, the idea of them wanting to make Mackie the face of ICE felt a little silly to me. I mean, this guy's face? Though I guess when your vice president is JD Vance, it's all relative, right? Okay, let's talk about this entire Mar-a-Lago sequence. First of all, insanely gorgeous location for South Park. Between this and heaven, it feels like we can really see where the work goes when they have that extra week to produce the show. But damn, I kind of felt like this location was a little bit wasted. I think they definitely wanted to prioritize getting more Trump content in this one after the premiere landed the way it did, and after the White House's furious response. And honestly, they fit a lot of stuff into this short 5 minutes that they spent in Mar-a-Lago. There was some super obvious, non-subtle stuff that people are definitely going to talk about on social media. All the Saddam Trump stuff again, this time joined by this little Oompa Loompa ass JD Vance who offers to do the lubing for him and Satan. Honestly, pretty spot on characterization for our vice president. Just major minion energy from that dude. A lube guy through and through. But I actually think the more damning commentary in the Mar-a-Lago sequence is everything they showed happening there. Obviously, they made brief mention of Trump's relation to the Epstein files in the season premiere, but South Park's portrayal of Mar-a-Lago was, did anyone else think it was a little Epstein-y? All of the people who worked there were pretty young-looking girls, and Mackie keeps walking in on them massaging old men, not looking enthused about it. And I guess if that wasn't subtle enough, he also walks in on Dora the Explorer giving an old man a massage. Now, obviously, this is somebody in a Dora costume, but come on. I think the implication here is clear. That is a child character giving an old man a massage. Not to mention that this is one of the first things Trump says when they get there.
Mar-a-Lago is for everyone. one that's got a nut.
As I mentioned though, the end of this episode is very strange. Mackie fleeing Trump leads to a very clear emotional climax as he finds Clyde and we get bookended counseling sessions between the two of them, tying the messages of their stories together. Mackie basically spells out that betraying your actual beliefs and principles in order to make a bag is only going to lead to sadness, basically stating that his experience with ICE and Clyde's Debate Bro podcast grift are very similar circumstances, and I think it's a good ending emotionally, and then the rest of the ending happens. Honestly, this entire Mar-a-Lago sequence felt to me like it could have been its own episode, and it seemed like they had enough ideas packed into those 5 minutes, and such a different tone in those 5 minutes, that they could have done like a horror-y Escape from Mar-a-Lago type episode. They portray it as this incredibly creepy location. The way Mackie keeps walking in on these gross massages reminds me a lot of the dog costume moment in The Shining. And then obviously they seem to be doing this whole The Thing type monster subplot with Kristi Noem's melting face. Good body horror stuff. They even showed it latch onto one of the other ICE agents, but then in the next scene, he just kind of brings it back to her. No consequences to what seemed like a genuine horror parody sequence. Not to mention, we see Mackie and Clyde go to the plane, but we don't ever see the plane leave the island. Instead, it just shows this absolutely bizarre Peanuts parody ending. And honestly, I feel like this could have worked as an ending. Really, all I feel like they needed to do was add a shot of the plane flying away from Mar-a-Lago over the Peanuts whistling. I think that would have gone a really long way to make it feel like an ending, to make it feel less abrupt and confusing. I honestly felt like I was missing something when it ended, like I just didn't understand what I had seen. But the reality is that the emotional story really ended at the Mackie and Clyde scene. I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt this ending beat was a little off. Matt and Trey definitely love their Peanuts homages. This isn't the first time they've used one, but this very much had the vibe of, we don't really know how to end this, which is a shame because it kind of left me with a confused feeling after what was otherwise just a very funny episode filled with some great biting commentary. Though I will say, as much as I am appreciating that the show is fully taking aim at a lot of things that deserve to be satirized and other things that really should be illuminated, I hope the show does get back to using the main boys in the next episode. Obviously, we got a lot of Cartman here, but almost no Kyle, Stan, or Kenny throughout the first 2 episodes of the season. Though, it also appears like we're gonna have to wait another 2 weeks for the next episode. It really seems like South Park is running season 27 on a 2-week production cycle for each episode. During the broadcast, they advertised that next Wednesday, August 13th, is South Park Day to celebrate the 28-year anniversary of the series premiere. And they're doing that with a day-long marathon that's supposedly leading up to an airing of the pilot, but there was no mention of the new episode that should be airing that day as well, so I don't think we should be expecting that there's going to be a new episode next week. We're probably getting episode 3 on August 20th, and if they maintain that 2-week schedule, South Park won't be airing its season finale until sometime in November, which is kind of crazy. It's a really strange production plan, and I'm curious if fans are going to lose patience at all waiting 2 weeks per episode. Personally, I think if the episodes make a big enough splash, people will get over it, but they really need to deliver. And I feel like this week's weird ending left me a tad disappointed since we know they took an extra week to produce the episode. Like they really couldn't figure out this ending even though they had a whole extra week. Though, if we do continue to get more really cool new locations like Mar-a-Lago in this one, that will be a benefit for sure. Overall, this was a pretty good follow-up to that monumental premiere. It was really strong for most of the runtime, but just ended in such a bizarre way, and I'm curious how that colored other people's experiences with the episode. I'm sure many clips will still be shared across social media. There's plenty of great images and hilarious social commentary here, and I expect they'll follow up in 2 weeks with something equally biting. South Park's 27th season just dropped its 3rd episode, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, but it seems as though the show has entirely lost its Tegrity Farms. Tegrity Farms is gone. After a couple of episodes of more biting political commentary that made major waves, this week they probably made a smart call in crafting a more character-focused episode driven by Randy. Of course, it definitely still fit in plenty of that biting political and social commentary, and made sure to feature the new Saddam model of Trump once again. As usual, there is plenty to go over, so let's dive into South Park Season 27, Episode 3, Sickofancy. Okay, so obviously with this week's episode seemingly ending the Tegrity Farms arc, the South Park headline is definitely going to make a bigger splash within the fandom than it is in the general public, unlike the previous 2 episodes. And with this only being the 3rd of 10 episodes airing every other week this year, I think dialing things in to have a bit more focus on, well, South Park characters was a smart move. But I thought this one had a really strong balance too. It wasn't like it entirely lacked that political and social commentary. The beginning of this season seems to be taking on a bit of a serialized light quality, like we saw in seasons 18 or 21, sort of bridging some of the things that were featured across many episodes, but not directly leading each episode into the next one. Since the last episode had a major focus on ice, this one started with Randy's Tegrity Farm workers all being hauled away by ice. And this all feels like a very Randy dilemma. Obviously, this guy isn't up in arms about ice for any empathetic human rights reasons. He's just mad because they're taking his Mexicans.
Stupid ice! They took my Mexicans again!
But even at the very top of this episode, they start to tease the potential end of Tegrity Farms. I mean, tell me where I've heard that before. I thought they were faking us out for sure. But as usual, Randy is sort of the Matt and Trey surrogate in the conversation, while the rest of the Marshes take on the role of much of the audience. I love when Sharon tells Randy that this was his dream and never theirs.
You guys never told me that.
Yes, we did.
I'm sorry, but I still think it's funny that South Park fans have complained about Tegrity Farms for like 7 years, and the show has mostly just mocked them. Let's put a pin in this, because obviously it's a big part of the end of the episode, so we'll talk a lot more about it later. Side note, did y'all notice that this puzzle Stan and Shelly are doing is Casa Bonita? It's not exactly the same, but they actually do have a super similar puzzle available at Casa Bonita's store. This episode was basically centered around Randy desperately trying to pivot Tegrity's business plan to prevent him from having to give up the farm, utilizing ChatGPT to guide him every step of the way, and bringing Towley along for the ride. I genuinely loved the tech pivot, renaming it to Tegrity and lambasting the fact that nobody understands a single thing modern tech startups even do anymore.
By harnessing AI, we've transformed from a quaint farm into a platform for innovation.
And in a bit of a jab at Elon Musk, Randy and Towley's tech pivot also comes alongside a new ketamine habit. Not only did I find this pretty funny, but this was our first example of Matt and Trey repurposing a premise from that season 27 trailer that was full of fake clips that they released back in April. Obviously delivered very differently, but it definitely showcases that the stuff they came up with earlier in the year isn't entirely off the table. So I feel like a Diddy episode is pretty likely at some point, but more importantly, maybe we'll get that Butters air traffic controller episode. I think this episode's biggest strength is the way it tied its social and political commentary together thematically. The bulk of this episode is centered on Randy overly relying on ChatGPT, something they seeded in the first episode of the season. Obviously, they had a big ChatGPT episode in season 26, which was over 2 years ago at this point, but AI's use and the way people rely on it for so much has truly grown exponentially since then. Hey, I mean, some people can't even write their South Park videos without it, and this episode is entirely driven by Randy utilizing ChatGPT to do just about everything for him. First, he tries to use it as a marriage counselor for him and Sharon, then it gives him a whole new business plan to save Tegrity Farms. Hell, it even breaks into an ICE detention center for him. But the social commentary here is clear and twofold. One, people are just absolutely overly reliant on this technology to an alarming degree. For some people, every single decision is run through AI, basically eliminating any need for problem solving or critical thinking. It's a big yikes. And two, the way ChatGPT is programmed, it's just sucking up to the user and telling them what they want to hear. Hence the title's play on words, Sickofancy.
Hey, so what's a sycophant?
This actually comes on the heels of the most recent ChatGPT release, GPT-5, that actually dialed back its more friendly demeanor. And would you believe it if I told you that people didn't actually like that? They want their computers telling them they're special little guys. And so of course, all of Randy's terrible ideas are continually enabled by ChatGPT. And I thought it was pretty smart commentary to liken this to a classic sycophant, before a nice hard cut to all of the corporate suck-ups bringing Trump Hussein gifts to curry his favor. And obviously this idea didn't come from nowhere. Just 2 weeks ago, Tim Cook gifted Trump a 24-karat gold bar, and earlier this year there was a lot of discourse about the $400 million Boeing 747 Trump accepted as a gift from Qatar Star Airlines. Both gifts were referenced here in the episode. I also appreciated that we got a couple cameos from some of the billionaires the show has lambasted in the past, including Zuckerberg and the massive-brained Bezos from season 22, who is of course designed after the aliens from the original Star Trek pilot The Cage. But yeah, this was just a really tightly written episode on a thematic level, and the way it tied these two sides of the story together narratively was all through Towley. Basically, Randy sends Towley to DC so he can also curry favor from Trump Hussein, basically attempting to lower weed's drug classification federally. And this entire sequence is just Mr. Towley Goes to Washington. It's pretty great. They just do a full-on homage to the 1939 classic Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, recreating the montage as Jimmy Stewart arrives in DC. They use the same music and parody many of the biggest beats of the montage, with a few key differences. For one, Towley's version is just caked with military presence due to Trump's recent takeover, bringing in tons of National Guard to our nation's capital. They pretty faithfully recreate the moments at the Jefferson statue and the Lincoln Memorial, though this time their faces have all been fully Trumpified, and both are once again showcasing what little he's packing. Pretty funny how persistent they are in showcasing this every episode this season. That's that good old Matt and Trey stubbornness I like to see. I don't know, I thought it was kind of funny to see people concerned that this was going to be a Towley episode, but I really think Vernon Chapman's performance as Towley is always so funny, and he had some absolutely killer line deliveries in this one.
Wow, this is gonna be so easy.
I genuinely just loved seeing Towley jaunt through occupied DC, wowed by everything he sees. And Mr. Towley Goes to Washington wasn't even the only fun movie homage we got here. Towley's actual meeting with Trump went full Return of the Jedi, with Randy in the Luke Skywalker role. Honestly, it's pretty funny that even in their relatively subdued Star Wars homage here, they liken Trump to a monstrous slave-owning mafia slug. They even make him do the Jabba laugh. They're really committed to just directly comparing Trump to any unflattering thing they can think of this year. And if you've seen Return of the Jedi, I'm sure you knew where this was going. Randy gifts Towley to Trump. It's clear that with the reaction the show has gotten from the White House and those that they've been lambasting in the current administration, South Park wants to keep prodding. And this week, I think they did a good job naturally tying this into the story at hand, whereas last week I felt like it maybe was a tad more forced. And they also seem to be doing something interesting with this storyline that feels like it's leading somewhere, at least with these last two episodes. I talked a lot in my last episode breakdown about how strange and abrupt that ending felt, and this week's didn't feel as abrupt, but it did feel just as ominous. Earlier in the episode, it seeds that Satan is pretty desperate to get out of this relationship and escape the White House, but it ends with him telling the newly enslaved Towley that that isn't going to happen for either of them. And this also makes me wonder about last week's ending as well. Obviously, we saw Mackie and Clyde make it to the plane, but we never actually saw them escape Mar-a-Lago. I'm now thinking this might have been intentional. Are all of these characters being imprisoned or trapped in one way or another, and will this come into play later in the season? Again, it definitely feels like these aspects are leading somewhere. Okay, let's talk about the real ending though. The ending that fans have seemingly been waiting for years. The way Randy's story wraps up here is facilitated through Sharon, which I really loved to see. Obviously, she gets the absolute brunt of Randy's foolish Tegrity Farms behavior, and after she realizes that ChatGPT is just enabling his terrible ideas, she co-opts ChatGPT's vocal style and demeanor to get Randy out of his combination anxiety spiral K-hole.
We have to sell the farm now just to be able to eat.
No problem. Would you like me to start laying out some exit strategies for you?
But it really does seem like this is it. The end of Tegrity Farms. After teasing and mocking the end of it so many times before, the Marshes have actually packed it up and sold the farm. It's truly the end of an era, and honestly, though I know so many fans are stoked about this, I'm kinda sad to see it go. Tegrity Farms officially lasted from October 17th, 2018 to August 20th, 2025. Nearly 7 years for 32 standard episodes and 9 specials. I definitely understand that Tegrity is sort of a monument to Randy trending towards main character status, and I think that is a valid complaint. But I think the complaints that the stories were one note one-note or repetitive were a little overblown and kind of surface level. Over this era, the show had a major variety of stories facilitated through Tegrity Farms, and I found a lot of them to be really fun and inspired. I feel like now that it's over, it will probably be looked back on a bit more fondly as time goes on. I think I'm going to do a bit of a retrospective on the era within the next month or so look out for that. But even as an honest fan of Tegrity Farms, I do think it's fair to say that it had run its course. And I think it's particularly hard to argue with how and why they've stamped this moment in time as the end.
Right now, there's just no place for Tegrity.
Too true, Randy. But the Marshes' move back to South Park does leave a lot of questions. Can Randy just go back to work as a geologist, or will he have to find a new job? And will that be part of the story for the rest of the season? It seems as though they're just going to move back into their old house, but what about Tolkien's family? They still live on Credigry Farms right across the street from Tegrity. Are they going to write them back into the main part of town, or are they just going to stay at Credigry, maintaining that connection to Tegrity Farms? It also makes me wonder how many of the other series developments they might decide to start walking back. They already found a way to keep Garrison in town instead of moving him to the White House. PC Principal has transitioned to Power Christian mode, but will they still keep him on the roster? Will Principal Victoria make a return? Honestly, PC Principal is way funnier. I hope he sticks around. And while I love Randy, I do hope the retreat from Tegrity means a return to some stories focused on the four boys. Honestly, the best way for them to open the 4th episode of the season would be a classic boys at the bus stop shot. I feel like we haven't gotten a good Kenny episode since like The Scoots, which was actually just one episode after the very first Tegrity Farms episode. Let's get some Kenny episodes in here. Regardless, with where this season has gone through its first 3 episodes, I genuinely just have no idea what to expect for episode 4, and that is pretty exciting. Obviously, I expect some Trump Hussein stuff again, but generally the direction of these episodes has, to some degree, surprised me every time. We are 6 weeks into the new season of South Park, which this year means we just got our 4th episode of the season titled Walk is Dead. An episode that had Butters searching for a super rare Labubu, put Jesus in a new role as school counselor, and had a massive Trump Hussein x Satan reveal that likely will have major ramifications on the remainder of the season, and maybe beyond. And the episode had a shocking number of similarities to an array of classic South Park episodes as well. There is tons to go over, so let's talk about season 27, episode 4, Walk is Dead. So it seems like the major cultural headline for this week's episode is definitely going to be their focus on Labubus, which took center stage immediately, putting a spotlight on a lot of the girl characters actually, including ones we don't get to see that often. And I thought their angle here was pretty funny, with the girls very excitedly discussing their Labubus before devolving into full-on fist fights 100% of the time. This definitely seems like a storyline that was at least partially inspired by Trey's daughter Betty, who actually takes on probably her most prominent role she's ever had in the show as her character Betsy here. Betsy has appeared just a handful of times, most recently debating Clyde in Got a Nut, but she gets a ton of dialogue in this episode, and the main focus up top.
I actually have chestnut cocoa, Labubu.
No way! That is the rarest one!
Isn't it so cute?
Honestly, I love to see Trey giving his daughter a more substantial role here, particularly because she really nailed it. She had to do a lot more than usual and gave a very, very funny performance. I laughed pretty hard at a lot of her line deliveries.
What kind of counseling was that?
I don't know, Jesus sucks, dude.
Because the kid focus in this one lands on the girls and Butters, the main boys are barely in it, just a little bit of Cartman and Kenny at the top of the episode. And though this is at least a kid-focused story, it is a bit disappointing that we haven't gotten a real substantial story about the main 4 boys yet. But you know, we do love a Butters story. It was also fun to get a bit of focus on some of the background girls in this one. Red being the most prominent was a real surprise. Even Sophie, who was introduced in the episode Basic Cable, got her first lines since that episode, though she was previously played by Becca Scott from Geek and Sundry's How to Play fame, and definitely wasn't in this one. This episode actually had a lot going on, with the Labubu story sort of tying everything together. Basically, the craze leads Butters to City Walk, which is now an Asian pop-up stand where he can buy the super expensive blind boxes, made even more expensive due to the tariffs. Changing City Walk to a pop-up stand and proclaiming Walk is Dead was also a pretty funny way to continue the Woke is Dead theme started noted in the first episode of the season. Not to mention, we got one of our few ever appearances of Liu Kim's wife, Wing, from the season 9 episode, aptly titled Wing. So many little callbacks here. This entire season seems to just be littered with small references to episodes from much older eras. I did really enjoy how they portrayed the whole Labubu game. As somebody who collected Pokemon cards from 2017 to like 2023, the gambly nature of the Labubu market felt very familiar. And it was funny to see Wing criticize Liu Kim for taking advantage of children when he was passing the buck of the tariffs down to the consumer.
Oh, here we go. I get screwed by tariffs, so I have to screw the children.
Speaking of tariffs, while this episode did feature Trump Hussein, it was a pretty subdued appearance, mostly used as a vehicle for the show to continually ask or state Donald Trump is fucking Satan, which, you know, respect to the wordplay this season. Between this and master debating, they're doing a lot of it. It's interesting. I've seen a lot of people already fed up with the Trump Hussein stuff from the first 3 episodes, claiming that it's just the same small package joke over and over again. But the first 3 episodes definitely just used those jokes as like seasoning, while each episode also focused on specific criticism and satire towards the president. The first was pointedly about his obsession with suing people and institutions. The second one likened Mar-a-Lago to Epstein Island while criticizing ICE, and the third was all about how he surrounds himself with sycophants and enablers. This one felt like the criticism was not so specific. Sure, it was tangentially about the tariffs, but all of the Trump sequences were just kind of the same bit. Fox News getting really turned on by the Trump-Satan speculation.
And I'm not saying if he is or he isn't, I'm just kind of hoping he is.
I'd say I definitely preferred the previous 3 episodes in their political commentary, but as we'll talk about later, this one is definitely setting up some big season-long lore. The non-Satan side of this episode is pretty fittingly about Jesus. I actually love the development that he's now just the new school counselor after Mackie was fired in the second episode of the season. It feels like there's some subtle commentary here. Bringing Jesus back to the schools, as they said in the first episode, was never as simple as, we're gonna let kids pray again. Now here we see Jesus is becoming a fundamental part of the school system, not just putting him back in the school. Despite this being an unconstitutional lack of separation of church and state, hey, did y'all hear that starting this year, every classroom in Texas has to have the 10 Commandments on display? I'm not sure why I just thought of that, but I like this as a place for Jesus, the character, in South Park. It's funny to see a 2,000-year-old guy try to navigate modern trends, just absolutely baffled by the concept of Labubus.
Tell her to stop saying my Labubus are knockoffs.
I'm sorry. What is a Labubu?
Also adored this photo behind his desk with God. Just a nice photo of a father and son. But the absolute biggest laugh I got this entire episode was the school meeting where they showed off the Labubu TikToks that the kids are making, revealing that the kids do full-on satanic rituals with them after unboxing a rare one. I loved this angle for the storyline. For one, Labubus absolutely do look demonic, so it's a fun and natural connection to make, but also a subversion of a satanic panic storyline. I like here that something as innocent as Labubus actually are being used satanically. It's pretty funny in 2025. Okay, here's a little tangent I want to go down. The school meeting gave us our first look at Strong Woman in the new season, a character we obviously know is married to PC Principal and even has kids with him. However, she didn't speak or really have any real presence in the episode outside of just kind of sitting there. And I'm curious if this is because they're still trying to figure out what to do with her now that PC Principal is Power Christian Principal. Has Strong Woman also shifted to Power Christian mode? And what of the PC babies? Are they Power Christian babies now? Honestly, that sounds like a decent piece of drama to center an episode around. It could be about the change in dynamic once PC Principal switched his ideology, or maybe PC Principal's conversion actually stemmed from some friction in his relationship. Maybe they broke up. Maybe PC Principal is a sad divorced dad now. Definitely feels like something worth exploring, and was a little strange to see Strong Woman just be completely silent at school. Although maybe this is also just commentary on how woke is dead. Now a strong woman stays silent. Okay, let's talk about this big Trump/Satan development. I think one of the issues I had with this episode was that this story felt a little hollow. That side of the episode was mostly filled with the Fox News Trump-Satan jokes, but I think maybe getting a little bit more screen time showing this from Satan's perspective could have gone a long way. I did really enjoy the one scene where Tattoo Fantasy Island JD Vance Vance clumsily tries to console Satan. I think it's sort of always been funny when they show Satan, Prince of Darkness, just genuinely depressed and going through an existential crisis. That's probably my favorite aspect of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. The fact that Satan has the I Want song in that musical is genuinely genius. So I did also enjoy Satan sitting in this garden, lamenting that he's trapped at the White House, opening up to this creepy little J.D. Vance.
I wanted to leave months ago, but I cannot. Because of what's in this box.
But I also think that the way the stories all sort of tied together felt a tiny bit lacking. Don't get me wrong, I think the Labubu satanic ritual is genuinely one of the funniest things in the episode and maybe in the entire season so far, but there wasn't a ton of clarity about the kids' motivation in doing the Labubu satanic ritual. They seemed to expect Satan would show up, but then they were also scared of him. What were they intending to do when he got there? Maybe it wasn't necessary to explain this. Maybe the entire point is that the kids are just following fads without thinking them through. I just felt like the reveal of Trump and Satan in the summoning circle was sort of the obvious expected one. And oftentimes South Park manages to hit us with surprises in these moments. I did like that there was at least a bit of continuity in terms of the kids summoning Satan, something we've seen a few times in the show now. Back in Freemium Isn't Free, Stan simply prayed and Satan answered him, but in Time to Get Cereal, Al Gore and the boys do a very similar summoning circle, complete with sacrificial chicken. But the place the episode did surprise is obviously the major M-Preg reveal. The reason Satan is tied to Trump is because he's pregnant with his child, and I expect that this is basically going to be the major ongoing serialized element for the remainder of season 27. And structurally, I really like how this season is operating. Each entry is largely episodic, with the Trump Hussein/Satan stuff acting as a smaller serialized through line. And honestly, I feel like there are a lot of possibilities with what they've set up here. Also, just another example of what we've seen them do every episode this season, portray Trump as intrinsically tied to something evil. But the whole Satan is pregnant thing, along with a bunch of other aspects, actually bizarrely make this feel like a sister episode to season 1's Damien. And other aspects of the episode make it feel akin to classics like Chinpokomon and Raisins as well. Obviously, the Asian fad takes over South Park aspect of the story is a lot like Chinpokomon. In fact, you even see some Chinpokomon figures at the Asian pop-up at City Walk, and the way that Red sort of manipulates Butters into getting her a specific Labubu for her birthday feels like two things. One, Butters not really understanding the transactional nature of his relationship with Lexus in Raisins, and two, Cartman demanding very specific Mega Man action figures for his birthday in Damien. Damien is obviously a season 1 episode about the son of Satan, and is also centered around a major showdown between Satan and Jesus. It's actually kind of wild how much this has in common with that episode. A character demanding specific birthday presents, a plot line about the offspring of Satan, a big showdown between Jesus and the Prince of Darkness. And obviously there are also plenty of possibilities in regards to where they'll go with this Satan pregnancy story. I'm curious if they'll finally acknowledge Damien again, though it feels unlikely. They pretty much ignored him after season 1. They didn't even acknowledge him in the South Park movie. I was definitely very intrigued by what Satan had in that box, but I obviously never would have guessed what it was. But this satanic box design and the rhetoric from Satan does feel akin to what we saw in the South Park movie. Obviously, I'm drawing these comparisons because of the whole Trump-Hussein connection in this season, but the way he's sitting here talking about this in the White House garden feels like there could be more to it. There are lines here that obviously feel very prophetic and serious, and the joke is that they're actually referring to his pregnancy. But there's one line that doesn't really line up with that bit.
The final showdown is upon us.
So I guess maybe this could have been in reference to Satan facing off with Jesus at the end of the episode, but that wasn't much of a showdown. I feel like this could end up having larger ramifications down the line, but also it seems kinda clear that they're mostly just seeing where the story takes them week by week. Satan telling Towley that there was no escape last week felt like a bigger, more ominous reveal was coming, and maybe there is something else still coming, but it doesn't quite align with the idea that Satan is trapped in the relationship because of the pregnancy. That wouldn't be something that traps Towley at the White House, just Satan. But obviously they're going to be continuing this storyline across the rest of the season. They wouldn't set up a satanic pregnancy like this without the intention of following it up later. And with that kind of a plot often comes dark prophecy type storylines, which again could be similar to what we saw in Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, where Terrence and Philip's death saw the rise of Satan onto Earth. I know the season 27 trailer was full of fake episode premises, but they did repurpose the whole Elon Keto ketamine thing, and the trailer also showed a bunch of American-Canadian war imagery. Given that this season is so filled with little callbacks and references to older South Park, and also contains the clear, overt Satan/Saddam references via Trump, I wouldn't hate it if they made the culmination of this season a sort of bigger, longer, and uncut follow-up. Now, they've done follow-ups to the movie previously, but the way Satan is now trapped in this abusive relationship via pregnancy feels like an escalation of his abusive relationship with Saddam, and it kind of makes a ton of sense to harken back directly to that big finale moment from the movie. I actually made a big Satan in South Park video years ago, expecting that it would stay up to date since he had, died at that point, but I might have to do an updated version after this season ends since there's so much Satan stuff here. But overall, I was kind of half in the bag on this episode. The Labubu ritual stuff was great, the way Butters got roped into everything felt like a pretty classic Butters storyline, and the more serialized elements of the season, like Jesus in school and Trump/Satan's butt baby, all have me intrigued and excited to see what comes next. I just didn't feel like this one quite came together in a way that felt as impactful or satisfying as I've liked, but it was fun to see them tackle a more kid-centric topic. I really hope we get a bit more focus on the main four boys at some point this season, and also just see how the Marshes are settling back into town after leaving Tegrity Farms behind. There's lots to look forward to with the remaining 6 episodes. The next episode is in 2 weeks on September 17th, so stay tuned. After a 3-week wait between episodes, South Park finally returned with its 5th of the season titled Conflict of Interest, and honestly, you could really feel the extra time they put into this one. For me, this was pretty easily the best of the season, seamlessly weaving together countless current events, a great kid-centric story, and the ongoing Satan x Trump lore. And I really mean seamlessly. They packed so much in, but it never felt overstuffed. They effectively defended Kimmel indirectly by skewering the FCC, called out blatant conflicts of interest we're seeing throughout a certain administration, and even gave Sheila a massive W by having her chew out Netanyahu. There's so much to go over, so let's dive in. So, the idea that frames this entire episode is the rise in popularity in prediction market apps like Polymarket.
People can make any bet they want, and then other users take them up on it.
Obviously, online gambling in general has become wildly popular over the past few years, and these peer-to-peer betting apps like this are a major evolution of that. I think this was a pretty fun way to center the story on the kids, something the season has sorely been lacking in, but it also is a great conduit to all of the other pieces of social and political commentary that the episode touches on. Honestly, a great way to open everything up without making the story elements feel disparate. And the big conflict that stems from this gives us a classic Kyle conflict via Sheila.
Will there be a snow day this month? Will Kyle's mom strike Gaza and destroy a Palestinian hospital?
Honestly, I was wondering if, when, and how South Park might talk about Gaza, and I know a lot of other fans have been as well. And though it wasn't really the focus of this episode, it closes out with some very satisfying Israel commentary. But we'll get there. The fact that this is even a possible bet on this app infuriates Kyle, and that drives his motivations, trying to get the bet taken down. When his fury starts making people actually take the bet more seriously, Cartman tries to manipulate his classmates even further so that he can make some money on the bet. One of the many reasons this one is titled Conflict of Interest. Speaking of conflicts of interest, the episode introduces Donald Trump Jr. as well, though not by name. But come on, look at that hairline, the terrifying smile. That's Lil Donnie for sure. Not to mention he's represented here as a strategic advisor for predictive markets, a role he actually holds at both Polymarket and Kalshi. Now, bear with me because this episode references a ton of important relationships and dynamics that are not explicitly stated, and so there's a pretty solid amount of real-world lore dumping I have to do to fully explain them. Now, the real-world event this is in reference to is the fact that Polymarket was the subject of federal regulations from the CFTC, prohibiting their services to US-based customers. Then, just days after Lil Don Jr. joined Polymarket as a strategic advisor, they were magically reauthorized for US-based customers, something that nobody would ever describe as wildly suspicious. So obviously, in making light of this near-transparent case of corruption, South Park portrays Don Jr. as the predictive markets strategic advisor, the CFTC's strategic advisor, and the FCC's strategic advisor, just hammering home that there are absolutely clear-cut conflicts of interest here, a guy with the most direct imaginable connection to the current administration that oversees this regulation, capitalizing personally on those regulative decisions. I think the reason they don't explicitly name this obvious Don Jr. caricature as Trump's son is because of the ongoing Satan x Trump baby plotline. Obviously, we had the major reveal in the last episode that Satan was pregnant with Trump's child. I think introducing Trump's actual child by name in a different role here would have probably just muddied up those aspects of the story. But I was really impressed with how they continued this storyline, weaving it into this episode's narrative in a very funny way. When Trump realizes how much his life is going to change when his Satan spawn is born, he basically starts planting Acme-like traps to try and kill Satan's unborn child. I loved the way these fully played out like classic Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoons, except instead of the traps harming Trump, they all hit the chairman of the FCC, Brendan Carr. And this is the way that South Park more or less launched their defense of Jimmy Kimmel, all without even mentioning his name. Bear with me for another quick lore dump. It is absolutely no secret that Matt and Trey abhor censorship. They have dedicated massive time in their career to fighting it. The entire South Park movie and 4 of their banned episodes are directly about censorship. And this is another piece of commentary that hones in directly on, you guessed it, conflict of interest. Kimmel obviously made comments on Charlie Kirk's assassination, relatively mild jokes after outright condemning the act, might I add. But after they were made, FCC Chair Brendan Carr specifically said that affiliates should pull Kimmel because of the comments made. And shortly after this, 2 very large affiliate networks, Sinclair and Nexstar, did just that. Nexstar, by the way, coincidentally needs Trump's approval for a massive deal that would expand the amount of TV households reached by channels that they control, and they need this approval because this deal would violate the congressionally set cap that prevents monopolies. So, to recap, Kimmel mildly criticizes Trump and his base, Trump's FCC chair calls specifically for affiliates to pull Kimmel, Nexstar, which needs Trump's approval for a big deal, then pulls Kimmel. I think we should maybe all get used to the phrase, conflict of interest. Honestly, South Park was very ahead of the curve on this whole issue as well. Despite the fact that Carr attempted to claim that the affiliates did this of their own volition, Trump's post on Truth Social after Kimmel's return not only seems to imply that the White House was involved in him getting pulled, but also goes on to imply that Trump is going to sue ABC for giving him his job back, referencing the $16 million settlement he got from CBS and Paramount, making Jesus' speech from the season premiere all the more apt.
If someone has the power of the presidency and also has the power to sue and take bribes, then he can do anything to anyone.
Okay, sorry for that semi-detour. There's just so much context that ties to everything they managed with this episode. It all lends to the reasons this episode is entirely about conflicts of interest, while also showcasing Brendan Carr as a bumbling moron who falls into trap after trap, even shitting himself into the sky like a rocket. This gag is actually another example of the season of South Park harkening back to classic gags. Season 4's Cartman Joins Nambla had Kenny try various tricky methods to end his mother's pregnancy, just like Trump does here, including a near-identical morning after pill scheme, both leading to the wrong person consuming them. Back then, Kenny's dad, though this time, of course, Brendan Carr's full-on rocket reaction was a bit of an escalation. I did think the funniest attempt from Trump Hussein was the attempt to give Satan toxoplasmosis from a massive pile of cat shit, which of course is instead transferred to Carr, letting them really spell out what this is all about.
Will the head of the FCC be okay, Doctor?
If the toxoplasmosis parasite gets to his brain, I'm afraid he may lose his freedom of speech.
Yeah, I don't think that arm pose for Brendan Carr was a coincidence here either. But I also really loved the little setup here for how they're going to move forward with this whole ongoing subplot. The reveal that this little tattoo version of JD Vance is actually full-on evil, basically placating to Trump's fears and trying to get him to take out the Satan baby just so that JD can succeed Trump. Not far off from how JD is trying to position himself in real life. But I think he's actually proving to be one of the funniest characters of the season. I've enjoyed having the Saddam persona back for Trump, but obviously it's repeating an old gag for the sake of comparison. This new caricature for Vance has continued to surprise and evolve each new episode, and this little evil face here was so funny. With all that being said, the bulk of the South Park character work in this episode was Cartman and Kyle focused, and that was truly refreshing. After not really getting any episodes so far this season where the focus is truly on the boys, this felt like a pretty classic Kyle and Cartman conflict. Kyle being outraged by something he finds despicable and personally offensive, and Cartman trying to exploit that for personal financial gain. I mean, textbook, really. But Kyle shows justified outrage that people are treating this serious issue about Gaza and Israel so flippantly.
And Jews and Palestinians are not football teams that you bet on.
But I actually think the commentary they made here was incredibly apt and well made via Kyle, and especially via Sheila, which was really refreshing to see since Sheila hasn't gotten a ton of focus in recent years. But because she's the subject of this incredibly offensive bet, basically directly likening her to the heinous acts committed by Israel, they were able to use a classic Sheila outrage moment to get across this important distinction.
It's not Jews versus Palestine, it's Israel versus Palestine!
Now, I think the way this episode escalated from here was really suspenseful and subversive, thanks to the history and lore of the show. Obviously, the way this whole thing is framed, Cartman is worried that Sheila actually is going to bomb a Palestinian hospital since she goes to Israel, and that this would lose him the bet that he tried to manipulate, a bet he made with money he fully stole by clearing his mom's bank account, so there's a lot on the line for him. But historically in South Park, Sheila doesn't have the best track record when it comes to, war. I mean, she became Clinton's Secretary of War in South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, and she fully motivated the war against Canada. So despite what she was saying in her angry rants here, I think a lot of South Park fans were likely thinking, wow, I really wonder if Sheila's gonna bomb a hospital here. Which makes the ending not just subversive, but really satisfying. Where now in Israel, she directs that classic outrage she's known for directly at Benjamin Netanyahu, fully calling him out not just for the decimation of Gaza, but for the way he deflects criticism.
Killing thousands and flattening neighborhoods, then wrapping yourself in Judaism like it's some shield from criticism.
Honestly, this was so well phrased. There's no doubt that because of the atrocities committed by Israel, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism, that Jews everywhere are being blamed for what the government is doing. And this episode does a great job pointing out that this is pointedly not protecting Jewish people as Netanyahu insists it's meant to do. It's actually in many cases making their lives harder and worse.
You're making life for Jews miserable and life for American Jews impossible!
It was honestly pretty cool to see this framed so effectively here. On the whole, this was just such an incredibly well done episode of South Park. While I've enjoyed many aspects of the season so far, I do think that their insistence on continuing the Trump Hussein x Satan plot has made some of it feel a bit disjointed. But this episode showed how well they can weave these stories together given the time. By making Trump's Looney Tunes-esque attempts to end the Satan spawn more or less the C plot, and also tying that directly to their humiliation of the FCC chair Brendan Carr, they were able to propel that serialized aspect of the season forward much more seamlessly. Plus, the amount of commentary they jammed into this thing was wildly impressive, taking the conflict of interest theme and tying it to literally every single subplot in the entire episode, all while interrogating the real-world conflicts of interest that we're dealing with right now, from the much-discussed Kimmel FCC situation to the astoundingly under-discussed strategic advisor situation for Lil Don Jr. Also, an impressively nuanced rebuke of Israel's actions in Gaza that's empathetic towards Jewish folks in America, and using the predictive market gambling trend as a perfect conduit between just about every single one of these subplots. Plus, it focused on the boys. I honestly don't think I have any complaints. This was the best episode of the season, kinda easily for me. A perfectly plotted narrative packed with seamless and scathing social and political commentary. Not to mention a classic South Park's credit gag with literally everybody being listed as a strategic advisor. Now, I expect that many folks are upset that this wasn't at all about Charlie Kirk, given their coverage of Kirk earlier in the season and, well, the obvious developments since then. I was surprised myself. I expected that the reason they didn't get this episode out in time last week was because they had shifted gears after he was killed, as they would have been a week into their 2-week production cycle at that point. But I think they probably made the right call not to shift gears, given how incendiary everything surrounding that has been, instead taking aim directly at the FCC sees censorship in the wake of everything that has happened. Though I gotta say, that stadium memorial, that seems ripe for South Park parody. We'll see if they end up touching on any of it at all this season. The news cycle just moves so fast. I mean, what are the chances that we get Satan taking Tylenol during his pregnancy at some point? Hard to say, since the next episode doesn't release for 3 more weeks on October 15th, though every episode after that will allegedly have the 2-week production cycle re-implemented, according to their social media. We shall see. Another 3-week wait and another new South Park, this one titled Twisted Christian, and also bizarrely was labeled as season 28, episode 1. We'll talk about it. But after probably my favorite episode of the season, I thought this was another really strong, albeit slightly unfinished feeling episode, though I suspect this was intentionally setting up the follow-up for the next one. But they once again managed to cover a lot of topics and ideas and weave them pretty seamlessly into a really fun narrative about modern Christianity and the surveillance state. There is plenty to talk about once again, so let's dive in. Okay, so as of writing this, the new episode hasn't released on Paramount Plus yet, but it seems as though this episode is being listed as season 28, episode 1, instead of season 27, episode 6. Rumors are it's because the show failed to deliver a season last year, so they're, I guess, reconciling this by delivering 2 back-to-back 5-episode seasons this year, which would be the shortest seasons ever delivered for the show, outside of like season 24's 2 specials. And this honestly seems pretty arbitrary, especially if it's still gonna be 10 episodes and continue the same story arc from season 27. But oh well, I guess this is officially season 28. Welcome to South Park season 28. This episode initially frames everything around the recent 6-7 trend/joke. And rather than try to make sense of it or actually explain it to the audience, they basically just use the fact that to anyone who isn't in on the joke, it's kind of inscrutable, which I think was a very funny way to go about it, and frankly made me very grateful that I didn't have to pretend to understand it at all. I think if I really needed to understand this joke, it would take way too many times to explain it to me. Like maybe 6 or 7 times. But through the fact that it's inscrutable to anyone who isn't under the age of like 12, we get the rest of this narrative flowing. Power Christian Principal holds a big school assembly, thinking the numbers are satanic, bringing in billionaire Peter Thiel to lecture about the Antichrist. If you don't know, Peter Thiel is a tech billionaire who has had his hand in probably too many aspects of the tech world to even mention them all, but countless tech companies, military technologies, AI advancements, surveillance tools, and maybe most importantly for the episode, he's the chairman of Palantir, which develops tech for a number of these categories, particularly surveillance and AI. Though even more importantly, this dude really does have thoughts about the Antichrist, like to the point where as recently as September, he has been giving private lectures off the record about the subject. So, you know, clearly a very stable guy that we can definitely trust with the continued advancement of the surveillance state. But this honestly all tied really neatly into the ongoing stories this year, because obviously we've got the whole pregnant Satan storyline going on, which, while this wasn't explicitly stated before this, I don't think many of us have inferred that it might lead to an Antichrist storyline. On top of that, this season has just been hypercritical of government conflicts of interest and overreach, and the ways billionaires have kowtowed to the government to advance their own goals that are not in our best interest. So Peter Thiel, both being an Antichrist enthusiast and a guy who helps run one of the most concerning examples of surveillance state advancements, is kind of perfect for, you know, the story, not for like the world. They even managed to use the storyline to actually create a coherent plot point out of the continued tiny Trump dick jokes, which I was genuinely impressed by, claiming that it's the only one small enough to get Satan pregnant. I won't go into detail there, but if you've seen the episode, you get it. Pretty funny to take a joke that people kind of felt was just the beating of a dead horse and make it a genuine plot point. Speaking of Trump, I feel like they've really found the perfect balance of having just a few Satan x Trump scenes per episode and finding an effective way to tie them to the narrative at hand. We learned last episode that Vance has been trying to stop Satan's baby from being born so that he can succeed Trump instead, and they immediately continued this by having him leadingly push Trump towards an abortion clinic. But the absolute highlight of this episode is its focus on Jesus. Yep, bringing Jesus back into the schools really paid off. But this was the commentary in the episode I liked the most. Basically, Power Christian Principal represents the sort of modern day American hyper-nationalist brand of Christianity that seems to dominate everything. And Jesus represents, well, Jesus. And obviously the whole idea here is that Jesus barely recognizes modern Christianity and doesn't really understand how he fits into it.
Yeah, see, I really think I don't belong here.
And honestly, this is nothing new for South Park. Obviously, focusing on this modern brand of Christianity is new, but the show has always had a lot of nuance in its portrayal of religion and faith. Jesus has always been a character in the show, and they've pretty much always given that character a lot of integrity. The show isn't as heavy-handed when it makes fun of faith, but it is very heavy-handed when it makes fun of religious institutions. South Park loves to point out their failures and hypocrisy. Fantastic Easter Special comes to mind, which I did a video about earlier in the year.
Bill, I'm not sure that double-crossing people is very Christian.
It is what Christ would have wanted!
Fantastic Easter Special was all about Bill Donahue and the American Catholic League basically hijacking Catholicism and turning it into something hateful and completely divorced from Christ's message. And they highlighted this by having Jesus return for the first time since being killed in Iraq to stop him. He also, put a rabbit back in charge of the Catholic Church, of course. Super normal episode. This episode takes a similar approach, but as you might expect from the themes and trends of the season, it's taking it from a different angle. It's exploring the same ideas, but with the way the world is being portrayed, it's kind of difficult for Jesus to actually get through to anyone, particularly as woke is dead now and extreme rhetoric continues to take over. I like this being showcased as sort of an identity crisis for Jesus, like looking at modern Christianity and asking himself, did I do this? How did we get here? And it's also something that I'm glad the show is addressing, because the disparity between modern day Christians' actions and the stuff Jesus stood for is looking wider and wider. This entire episode, Jesus just keeps fighting for the rights of these kids and trying to lead with love.
I just don't feel good about treating people this way. I think the most important thing still has to be loving and respecting each other.
Which, is just met with gay slurs from PC Principal. I really loved that this episode not only decided to give us more focus on Jesus, but also on PC Principal. Since they revealed that he's now Power Christian Principal, he's remained a bit of a background character, a symptom of the changing socio-political landscape. But this put a real spotlight on his new attitude, and honestly, I think the game of the character still works just as well, switching from political correctness to Power Christianity. The comedy always stemmed from how absolutely aggro this dude was about fighting for these very sensitive subjects. A guy who just goes borderline violently ballistic if you use a microaggression. And keeping that same attitude while he vocally advocates for Jesus, going as far as to rip his shirt off and trying to fight people who feel differently, it's basically the same joke. The aggressive action does not match the core tenet of the belief the aggressive action is defending. The character's entire shtick is hypocrisy. I was also happy to see them finally address Strong Woman, who is now Strong Christian Woman, and has adopted the look of some of the stereotypical media and political personalities we're seeing from the Christian side of things. But I was mostly just happy they acknowledged her, because my first question when PC Principal converted to Power Christianity was how Strong Woman would be okay with that. Though I do kind of wish they hadn't just brushed over the conflict via dialogue. It honestly seemed like that could have been an interesting episode in itself. Now I just wonder if they'll address the PC babies. Weirdly enough, the connective tissue between every storyline in this episode was actually Peter Thiel, and I think their commentary about him was pretty clear. He is straight up using satanic panic scare tactics, spinning stories about the Antichrist so that people's fear might lead them to give up more and more of their autonomy, more access to their personal data, more surveillance, less privacy, in the name of safety. But as it turns out, in this story, Thiel is also working for JD Vance, which tracks. Both of their goals are to eliminate the Antichrist, right? Honestly, I was really impressed by how well everything themed out in this one. Obviously, there's a bit of a satanic theme this year, with Satan having his most prominent role in decades, though I guess you can extend that to a religious theme, with Jesus also having his most prominent role in decades. We saw them tie this to the Labubu story a few episodes ago with their demonic and satanic rituals, but using the 6-7 joke as the connective tissue to some of these more fringe and extreme religious beliefs was a very funny idea. So because the adults do not understand the 6-7 joke, they think it's some kind of satanic cult. Because Cartman can't help but laugh hysterically at every 6-7 reference, he starts puking endlessly. Because he starts puking endlessly, this leads to a full-on possession storyline parodying The Exorcist with Peter Thiel. The atmosphere of the exterior shots of the Cartman household during these scenes were so great, and honestly, somehow the expressions and reactions from puking Cartman were both funny and genuinely creepy. They really walked the line well. But let's talk about how it all wrapped up, because Well, it was kind of depressing, and also I think forecasts a bit about the rest of the season. After PC Principal tries to set up Jesus with a quote-unquote Christian woman, and Jesus has a little bit of a meltdown about modern Christianity, there is a confrontation with PC Principal.
I'm saying that you and a lot of other people seem to have a very warped sense of what Christianity is.
Are you questioning my faith?
I mean, PC Principal feeling so insecure about his Christian faith that he literally beats up Jesus about it? Pretty funny take on modern Christianity. But where this episode goes that surprised me was that rather than fully reject PC Principal and resign like I expected Jesus to do, he actually gave in. He goes back, takes the Christian woman home, cuts off his sleeves, shaves his beard so he just has a stash, and he bros out. And then the episode ends. And while yes, a lot of this season's episodes have ended on these sort of dour, downer endings, this one left a lot of threads lingering, and I think it likely spells out that we're going to see a pretty direct follow-up next week, because the Jesus transformation wasn't the only sort of cliffhang. Peter Thiel also wasn't able to exorcise Cartman's 6-7 possession and claims he has to bring him to Washington. Also, this episode's original description on the Comedy Central schedule actually stated that Cartman's possession might be the key to stopping the Antichrist. I think this is basically spelling out what we can expect next week or in the future of the season. For one, they had 3 weeks to produce this episode, and I think it's likely that they used that time to prep how the story would continue into the next episode. 2, the next episode is set to air on October 29th, which would likely mean we're looking at a Halloween episode. And is there any more fitting of a time for them to have Satan give birth to the Antichrist than their Halloween episode? I guess maybe a Christmas episode? But I think I'd rather see Jesus be reborn that day. And on top of this, they showed that Towley listened in on Vance's conversation with Peter Thiel where he revealed their plans, which will clearly come into play later. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the way all of these disparate story elements are starting to really coalesce. I've always felt that these serialized light seasons of South Park yield the most satisfying results at the end. And obviously the whole Trump x Satan thing has been pretty blatantly serialized, more so than a lot of previous seasons, but they're really bringing a lot of the surrounding stories together in ways that I didn't expect, and in ways that actually make sense. It seems like the next episode should see Peter Thiel using Cartman's 6-7 possessions somehow to try and help Vance abort Satan and Trump's butt baby. A very normal sentence, but a very normal show. But it's also possible that this all continues to happen in the background while another plot takes the focus, and these continue to coalesce into the eventual finale. I also expect and hope that Jesus will revert to normal at some point, maybe to actually help stop the Antichrist when it's born. Would be a pretty good arc for Christ to lose his way and only find his way back to stop the Antichrist. While I did really love this episode, I do hope that the remainder of the season brings a little more focus back to the boys. Cartman has been really interesting this year because he's not really been in his usual more antagonistic place. I think this is largely because the show has established the whole woke is dead thing, and so as spelled out in the premiere, Cartman feels out of place that so much of the world is more or less doing his shtick. The world is sort of acting as the Cartman-like antagonist this season. And while this sort of sent him into an existential crisis, it also has meant we've gotten to see him be a little bit more of a kid this season. Like, this entire episode is just about him obsessing over a joke. That's his entire thing. That's fun. But while the kids were a part of the storyline, none of the other boys got a spotlight. It would be nice if Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Butters maybe had to help and or save Cartman if he's taken to Washington. The next episode is also maybe a Halloween one, so those are great opportunities to focus on the kids being kids. I just hope we get a little bit more of the kid dynamic going on. Overall, I was pretty impressed by this episode. Despite this season having a tendency to sort of rug pull us at the end of each episode with a shocking or sudden cut to credits, every storyline in Twisted Christian felt like they seamlessly tied together, which is impressive because it had a lot going on. It really seems like when South Park has that extra time to work out the scripts, they do really impressive work. These 3-week breaks have delivered probably my 2 favorite episodes of the season, but our next episode is in just 2 weeks, so we'll see how it all shakes out. I've got bad news, guys. I'm being told that South Park sucks now. Probably because they didn't air their new episode on Wednesday for the first time, I think, in the history of their show. South Park's new episode, The Woman in the Hat, was their latest Halloween special, and I think it is the first ever episode to air a different night of the week on Friday, with this one being delayed to air on Halloween, which is also why this breakdown is late. The episode delivered 2 pretty distinct but parallel stories. We finally got a bit of focus on the boys, but in an incredibly incredibly metatextual story about the state of South Park, hence the whole South Park sucks now thing, and the continuation of the more serialized Trump x Satan storyline, bringing a lot of the season's stories together into a sort of haunted house episode. I think there is a lot to say about not just the episode here, but what it says about the state and future of South Park. So let's dive into season 28, episode 2, The Woman in the Hat. Still weird that this is season 28 already. So, this episode finally followed up the events of the third episode of the year, in which the Marshes finally moved away from Tegrity Farms. And honestly, it felt kinda crazy that it took them 4 more episodes to address that, with some pretty big reveals along the way. Now, Stan obviously really hated Tegrity Farms.
Times are hard, and I know we all miss Tegrity.
I don't miss Tegrity, Dad.
But here we find out that he has also hated his post-Tegrity Farms life so far because they actually couldn't afford to move into their old house and have been living in a motel. And I'm happy that they're actually turning this post-Tegrity life into a story, not just an immediate reversion back to the status quo of years past. But the episode sees the Marshes leave the motel and move in with Stan's grandfather at Shady Acres, which, yeah, that's probably a worse place to live than Tegrity Farms, I'd say. But this episode takes Stan's frustrations with his life and turns it into a full-on metatextual commentary that is basically just responding to the fan reactions to this season of South Park so far.
The truth is, I think a lot of people are just afraid to admit that South Park sucks now.
Personally, I am a big fan of when Matt and Trey have this sort of back and forth with their audience about the state of the show, and I think it makes sense to use Stan in this context. Stan being sort of fed up with how things are going is a relatively common occurrence in South Park, with this obviously taking center stage in the classic You're Getting Older episodes in season 15, which I think was probably up until that point the most metatextual any episode had ever been in the show's history. And obviously this entire season, or season 27 and 28 I guess, have been met a bit divisively from the fandom, given their relentless focus on Trump and his administration. Personally, I really liked the way this episode's story approached this idea, but again, I'm a fan of the metatextual back and forth in general. I do think that more so than the previous few episodes, this Halloween special really did feel like 2 very separate stories happening simultaneously. Obviously, they overlap towards the end a bit, but they were largely disconnected across the board, which I would probably also argue is something that fans don't love about this ongoing season with the Trump/Satan stuff. For the sake of this video, we're going to cover the Stan and the Boys story before dipping into the serialized Trump stuff. I will also say, I don't think it's ever been clearer that Matt and Trey are super in tune with the fandom's reactions to things.
Remember when we used to do stuff? Just us guys?
A lot of Stan's complaints here are straight up things that I and many others have said about the show in our videos or on social media or on the Reddit, etc. Even in the episodes I've praised this year, anytime there isn't a focus on the main 4 boys, I have basically said that I'd really like to see a focus on the main 4 boys in the next one. I'm kind of a broken record in that way. Here, look, I said it at the end of my last breakdown. While the kids were a part of the storyline, none of the other boys got a spotlight. It would be nice if Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Butters maybe had to help and or save Cartman if he's taken to Washington. The next episode is also maybe a Halloween one, so those are great opportunities to focus on the kids being kids. It's funny, almost everything Stan says here, I can point back to my own videos and think, oh, this might be about me.
Like, Kenny, I haven't even heard you say anything in like 4 months.
Here's a clip from my Sickofancy breakdown a few months ago saying basically this. I feel like we haven't gotten a good Kenny episode since like The Scoots, which was actually just 1 episode after the very first Tegrity Farms episode. Let's get some Kenny episodes in here. Obviously, I'm not the only one saying these things. Kenny has his stands, but it is funny that I can just pull clips from my breakdowns this year, and this new episode feels like direct responses to some of those takes. This storyline obviously does take a pretty comedic turn, but as usual, I also think that comedic turn contains some pretty poignant commentary. Stan starts a South Park Sucks Now page online, and over 700,000 people join, lending a lot of validity to his feelings. But rather than create a movement or commiserate with those people, he goes another route.
The South Park Sucks Now cryptocurrency coin.
Yup, just a full-on crypto pump and dump rug pull scheme. Now, obviously there is commentary connective tissue here to the Trump of it all, given the fact that he and his family have made an estimated $1 billion on crypto, including via multiple meme coins like this one. But I also think from Stan's perspective, there is some really interesting cultural commentary here. here. Stan and his family are basically suffering the toughest times they ever have. They have gone through a lot historically, but not even having a home to live in is for sure the most we've seen them struggle. And obviously there's a lot at play there, including Randy's ineptitude, but they also make it pretty clear that the state of the country is also a big factor in their inability to get back on their feet. Randy points to the struggling job market and also that the government shutdown is preventing him from getting his old job back. And obviously there are a lot of people struggling similarly right now in real life. The job market is really rough. Inflation is rampant. Rent is so high while the median income can't match it. And in this instance, Stan is willing to do anything to get out of that hole, including throw tons of other people under the bus. Fully unethical and immoral things that would actually harm other people's well-being for the sake of his own fulfillment. And if that isn't commentary on the state of this country, where the class disparity continues to widen, I don't know what is. The entire ecosystem is so unhealthy that in order to pull themselves out of poverty, people have to push others back down into it. And with Kyle's cousin Kyle's help, they aren't even pretending that this isn't the case here.
We're gonna screw a lot of people out of that money, boys. It's gonna be fantastic.
Obviously, Kyle has a major issue with this, as he would, but I do think that Kenny's inclusion in Stan's scheme is interesting. On one hand, he is the kid who has always been in poverty in South Park, so it sort of makes sense for him. But on the other hand, Kenny has also always been shown to be one of the more thoughtful, caring, and protective out of the main boys. I talk about this in pretty strong detail in my Big Kenny video I made a few years back. Check it out if you're interested. And obviously there are exceptions in his actions depending on circumstance and motivation, but it was a bit of a bummer to see him so willing to throw others under the bus here. It was also really fun to see cousin Kyle again. I don't think he's actually been in an episode since The Losing Edge, all the way back in season 9, though he did have some major story prominence in South Park: The Fractured But Whole, the video game. So I think that's really kind of the last time we saw him. But it was pretty funny to bring him in as the connective tissue to the Trump/Satan storyline here. And I guess before we get into the big wrap up for the boys, this is a good time to jump over to that side of the story. As I'm sure everybody has gotten used to this season, the other half of the episode was all centered around the ongoing Trump x Satan storyline with the impending birth of the Antichrist. In the last episode, we got a closer look at JD Vance's plan. It seems like he and Peter Thiel are going to use Cartman's possessed state to get rid of the Antichrist baby somehow. Thiel because he's obsessed with stopping the Antichrist, and Vance because he doesn't want anyone to take his position as next in line behind Trump. But this part of the story feels like it took a bit of a back seat this week. Thiel was supposed to take Cartman to Washington, but instead is stalled out in a motel because people in Washington are on to their plan. I did think it was a little strange that none of the boys seem to have any concern about where Cartman is, particularly in an episode where their whole thing is, remember when it was just us guys doing stuff? They were pointedly missing one of those guys, but it mostly feels like the story was stalled so they could do their Halloween-themed episode here, and honestly, I really enjoyed this aspect. The entire season has slowly been introducing or creating these borderline monsters from Trump's administration. Kristi Noem's melting face going full-on substance, Brendan Carr turning into this lumbering zombie mummy that has lost his free speech, Don Jr. looking like Don Jr. This episode also introduced Stephen Miller as a sort of Igor-like servant at the White House, and Pam Bondi, whose nose just keeps mysteriously covering itself in shit, rounding out a pretty decent group of monster parallels. I particularly enjoyed the Miller characterization. I mean, that guy is a straight-up ghoul. I could maybe have done with a little less shit on Pam Bondi's face, but it was funny. They basically turned the White House into a full-on haunted house, and I think creatively and visually, my absolute favorite aspect of this episode was how they portrayed Melania Trump. Obviously, she has not really been referenced so far in South Park, since Trump is in a full-on relationship with Satan, but they portray her as this specter haunting the White House, wearing her signature large-brimmed hat, completely obfuscating her face, and I genuinely thought this was just such a great quote-unquote scary design. It is honestly spooky as hell, and the way it just stands in the corner, this was good. Well done. We also get a little Towley cameo as Trump's towel here, and I have to presume that somehow Towley is the one leaking the info about Vance's plan, since we know he's the only one who overheard that phone conversation, but obviously he's just sort of been in the background here. Overall, this wasn't a particularly consequential story, and felt incredibly disconnected from the rest of the episode, but I did appreciate their approach to a Halloween story here. The spooky shots of the White House making it look fully haunted were really cool, especially the exterior, and I just found the return of all the Trump administration ghouls to be pretty enjoyable, not to mention the great cut to credits with this haunting old-timey song and the woman in the hat in the White House window. But overall, despite being so rooted in serialized elements of the season, it really didn't feel like it moved the serialized story forward very much, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it makes sense that people are starting to feel like the whole Trump side of things is making South Park feel like a different show. We'll get back to that later. The way these stories connect is Cousin Kyle seeking Don Jr.'s help to approve their crypto rug pull, and interestingly, they actually named him Don Jr. in this episode after keeping him nameless in his first introduction. But Cousin Kyle gets so freaked out by the haunted White House that he fully throws in the towel and admits to his real motivations with their meme coin.
Crypto's just a giant money laundering scheme for the rich to get richer. Please don't haunt us anymore.
Leading to his incarceration, but basically as a patsy for the crypto laundering scheme. Pretty clear commentary considering the Trump ties to crypto. So obviously the connection here is that the meme coin goes nowhere and Stan has to remain at Shady Acres, which leads to the final beats and some more pretty clear-cut meta commentary. Stan laments that things are not going to go back to the way things used to be, which is clearly Matt and Trey commenting on the fan reaction to the approach their show has been taking this year, saying, "Sorry guys, we know you miss old South Park, but we're running with this storyline and going to see it through." But it also leaves with this optimistic take both for South Park's future and for the future of the country, hopefully.
I know it's hard to see right now, but things will go back to normal. And in the meantime, we just have to make the most of where we are.
I think this is pretty interesting because it shows that, to a degree, even Matt and Trey acknowledge that we're missing out on classic South Park stories. I've seen some fans say this is them admitting the show is bad now, which I don't agree with. Personally, I find this whole season and admission of their true desires versus their actions to be pretty interesting. Matt and Trey have long said that they too prefer the kids doing stuff storylines, and yet they continue to wade into the waters of the political commentary storylines. They said just last year that they were exhausted by covering Trump on the show, and yet this season has featured Trump every single episode. And obviously you've got plenty of people crying TDS or calling them liberal media shills now, which is very funny to me given their entire history, and particularly because, to me, it feels like Matt and Trey see themselves in a pretty unique position here. They have a show that is not afraid to criticize anyone. They are known for this, and they are also uniquely positioned in that they have a massive audience that crosses political aisles. I think given their history, especially the way they have objected to extremism, there is just no way they would be covering the stuff so thoroughly if they didn't feel an almost obligation to do it. I know people are exhausted by it, and it is exhausting, but I also think the criticisms that it's the same jokes over and over are pretty inaccurate. Sure, there are some jokes that repeat themselves, but those are all seasoning on what has otherwise been completely separate and pointed criticisms towards different aspects of the Trump administration. Every episode focuses on something new, and given the nonsense that they got caught up in with the Paramount debacle, I'm not surprised they started off the season a little salty about it all. Matt and Trey have been known to double and triple down in their history. I mean, look at all the band episodes. It feels to me like Matt and Trey are pretty committed to seeing through this Trump, Hussein, Satan, Antichrist storyline across this season, and then after that, who's to say? My expectation is that we won't see something quite like this in subsequent seasons, but obviously everything's on the table, who knows? And while I personally definitely prefer the more kid-centric stories and do miss that brand of South Park, I'm relatively excited to see how this season all comes together. They have put a lot of chess pieces on the board, and given the extra time that they've been taking to make each episode, it feels to me like things are going to coalesce in a pretty interesting and hopefully satisfying way. Obviously, we are leading up to the birth of the Antichrist, which I think is the big question mark that could make or break the season. How does that pan out? What is the Antichrist? What are we looking at here? Trump secretly wants that baby aborted, but I am personally expecting some kind of showdown with Jesus, who hopefully will revert back from his new power Christian attitude, come to his senses, and stop the Antichrist. Or maybe power Christian Jesus is the Antichrist, and it'll be a subversion? Lots of possibilities here. We've still got Towley trapped at the White House, seemingly leaking info on JD Vance and Peter Thiel's plan. Cartman is possessed by the 6-7 demon and appears to be instrumental in playing a role in stopping the Antichrist. And Vance is obviously trying to take over the country from Trump Hussein. They've got a lot of balls in the air here, and I feel like the fact that they've been so committed to taking their time on each episode this season means they're poised more than ever to possibly basically catch all of them. And I really hope they manage, because despite my personal preferences in regards to the focus this year, I could see this being a really satisfying conclusion when all is said and done. Hopefully one that might make people appreciate the season more as a whole. Overall, this wasn't one of my favorites of the year, but I did have fun with it. The metatextual stuff always hits me in a way that I find entertaining, and I think the haunted house detour for the season was a pretty inspired idea, despite the episode maybe feeling a bit disconnected between its A and B stories. South Park just released its 8th episode of the year as we enter the home stretch for the season, with a story taking aim at generative AI titled Sora Not Sorry. And oh boy, this episode was a lot, giving us a very solid Butters-centric story with a strong focus on the South Park police as well, but also starting to corral some of the numerous story threads from this year to set the stage for the impending finale. Oh, also somehow, maybe the most graphic Trump storyline yet, among other graphic aspects in this episode. So let's dive into South Park Season 28, Episode 3, Sora Not Sorry. So this week's episode effectively acts as a loose sequel to the 4th episode released this year, Walk is Dead, in which Butters spent the entire episode trying to get Red a specific rare Labubu for her birthday, which obviously resulted in a satanic ritual summoning Trump, Satan, and revealing their pregnancy, because this show is super normal. But this episode reveals that Butters not only feels slighted and used by Red, but is enacting his revenge by creating lewd, disgusting videos of her with generative AI, specifically Sora too. And I mean, honestly, I cannot show these videos without being demonetized, so if you've seen the episode, you know. If not, sorry. I don't think I talked about this when we covered Walk is Dead, but it's actually kind of crazy that Red is getting such a prominent role this season for basically the first time ever, especially because she's a character that's been around literally since the pilot episode. She has just genuinely always been a part of the show, a part of the boys' class, one member of the group of girls, she's friends with Bebe, but Walk is Dead, 28 years after that premiere, was her first ever truly prominent role in an episode ever. And that kind of rules. South Park has such a wide cast of side and background characters, and the fact that they can pick out some of these lesser known characters and develop them even all these years later is pretty impressive. I guess they've done this a few times before. Heidi Turner comes to mind. I'm kind of hoping we get more Red moving forward though. But Butters effectively makes revenge porn about Red, which Kenny finds very funny and the rest of the boys find very gross. Man, it's kind of a bummer that the longer the show has gone on, the more like men's rights coded Butters has gotten. His initial shtick was always just that he's the sweetest and most innocent kid in South Park, and either A, the worst possible things would happen to him, or B, he would sort of unknowingly and innocently find himself in not very innocent situations, like in Butters' Bottom Bitch. But around season 20, Butters started to fully fall down the sort of incel-coded perpetual victimhood path, when his Canadian girlfriend Charlotte dumps him in solidarity with the other South Park girls. You know, the whole Wieners Out movement that he started. This feels like a very clear continuation of that behavior. Butters immediately seeks revenge in one of the most heinous ways imaginable.
Yeah, why would you guys do this to her? 'Cause Red's a bitch! She totally used me!
I actually think there's a really clear parallel that shows exactly how Butters has sort of regressed in his worldview over the years. One of my favorite ever Butters moments was in the classic episode Raisins, which is another episode where Butters' innocent nature is taken advantage of and used by another girl. Butters keeps buying gifts for a waitress at Raisins, thinking she's actually interested in him, and obviously eventually learns that she wasn't. But in that instance, Butters doesn't feel spiteful or feel like he needs revenge. He actually just showcases his unending optimism despite having been chewed up and spit out.
But at the same time, I'm really happy that something can make me feel that sad. It's like, it makes me feel alive, you know?
It's a pretty stark contrast to how he behaves after the Labubu incident, isn't it? And by the way, this isn't to say Red's behavior is completely excusable. She was absolutely using people to fill out her Labubu collection, and her friends even acknowledge this.
Well, you did kind of use him.
However, this is a disproportionate response in an insane way, an absolutely unhinged and illegal reaction to a kid being selfish, basically. Kenny's involvement here also kind of bummed me out. Obviously, Kenny does have a penchant for crude, gross humor, but he's also historically been a very protective and righteous kid who mostly seems to follow a moral code. I mean, he is Mysterion after all. Not to get too lost in the sauce with the whole meta-commentary aspect, but this almost feels like a tongue-in-cheek follow-up to the meta-commentary from the previous episode.
Like, Kenny, I haven't even heard you say anything in like 4 months.
What the heck you want to say, dude?
I mentioned in the last breakdown that this felt like a direct response to what many fans have said in their critiques of this season, including myself in some of my previous videos. And using Kenny in this way here almost felt like a direct "be careful what you wish for" response to that. Oh, you want more Kenny? Well, he's making revenge of his classmates. Oof. Of course, Red isn't in the clear here either, because this leads to a Sora 2-fueled revenge video war between her and the other boys, and they all make some of the most vile, disgusting videos imaginable. The first of which being about Butters doing, well, something to Totoro. Poor Totoro. This flings the episode forward into some of its funniest places, in my opinion, primarily putting a focus on South Park police believing that these AI-generated videos are actually real. And of course that they need to bring Totoro and these other fictional characters to justice for what they've done to the children. This is definitely my favorite aspect of the episode, really seamlessly weaving that social commentary with classic South Park character dynamics. I actually made a whole video about how South Park portrays the police earlier this year. If that interests you, maybe check it out after this video. And this episode would have been a really funny button on that video. But I also just love that this is more or less commenting on how so many folks over the age of like 50 absolutely cannot tell when a video is AI generated. If you spent any time on Facebook in the past couple years, you've seen it. Just AI slop running rampant and far too many people falling for it. But escalating that concept by using the police is really funny, especially showcasing the detectives attempting to solve AI generated crimes that are literally not possible. It's great stuff. This police story also finally ties us back into the Cartman-Peter Thiel story that has sort of, no pun intended, petered out the last couple of episodes. Now, obviously, this could still play a role in the final 2 of the season, and I hope it does, but this storyline definitely felt like it just sort of drove into a cul-de-sac for 2 episodes and came right back. At the end of Twisted Christian, Peter Thiel's Exorcist parody led him to take Cartman to Washington, or so he said, but the very next episode revealed that they never made it to Washington and were holed up in a motel. This episode actually not only continues the motel plot, but Cartman is rescued by the end of the episode, making the entire thing feel a little bit pointless. But again, they could still make this work in the scheme of things, and it also just had some pretty funny aspects in the story this week as opposed to last week where we just sort of had a brief check-in with the pair. In order to convince Leanne that Cartman was safe, Thiel was using Sora 2 to show Eric at various places having a fun time, but what really made this bit fun was the fact that the Sora 2 generated version of Cartman was just stuck awkwardly using all of his oldest catchphrases.
Hey man, things are good here. I love cheesy poops. I'm just stoked to be feeling better and I'll be home soon. Respect my dog time.
This is also a pretty funny storyline if you take into account 2 other things. 1, how right now many people are generating South Park stuff with Sora, and 2, the fact that some of the earliest attempts to automate this kind of narrative storytelling was by using South Park as well. I made a video about this a few years back when a piece of software called AI Showrunner was the culprit, making some truly god-awful, though mildly coherent stories with the tech. And in a bleak update, that software was actually recently invested in by Amazon as they attempt to become the quote-unquote Netflix of AI. Though their marketing has gotten flashier and their ambitions have gotten loftier, they definitely aren't in a place where user-generated TV shows are even remotely feasible yet. But obviously the tech is constantly improving. Though, personally, I simply don't see their goals of users being able to generate full seasons of their own TV shows coherently ever coming to fruition in a way that is actually narratively satisfying. This episode doesn't particularly dive that deep into that side of Gen AI, but it does pretty accurately showcase how sort of derivative the creations can be when based on existing IP, like South Park, via these Cartman shorts. The use of Totoro in the other part of the Gen AI storyline was also very intentional, given that one of the most popular AI generative styles is Studio Ghibli, despite the fact that none of it actually looks particularly Ghibli and also features that piss-colored filter they can't seem to get rid of. Ghibli has actually not issued any cease and desists over the AI training on their IP, which is frankly a little disappointing, but in this episode they bring in some Ghibli execs who are furious about what they've done to Totoro. It also seems like they maybe avoided any actual likenesses of Ghibli execs, at least from my knowledge base. Miyazaki and Toshio Suzuki have pretty recognizable faces that don't really match these angry folks here, but this is used as another way to highlight the South Park police's ineptitude. Since they can't understand the Ghibli folks, they think they're actually lawyers who are there to defend Totoro, who they of course still believe to be a predator. This really is an instant classic for Detective Yates and the South Park police, in my opinion, and as far as the individual plot lines for the season go, this is one of my favorites. The way they are so confidently wrong every step of the way, just a dynamic that always works for me. And this obviously leads directly into the climax and resolution here. Basically, the way the Sora 2 wars escalate escalate, just loops more and more fictional characters in, and of course the cops think they're all actual predators. The yarn string conspiracy board was particularly funny. I've seen a lot of people wonder why most of these characters are like ancient cartoons that kids would not know these days outside of like Bluey, and I think people are kind of overthinking it. The answer is almost certainly that Matt and Trey grew up on Hanna-Barbera stuff and thought it would be funny to use those characters. I mean, they've already done an entire Wacky Races parody episode. I unfortunately did think that the resolution for Butters in this one maybe felt a little rushed or unearned. After the police get involved and Butters is interrogated in an attempt to lock up Totoro, he just refuses to answer their questions out of fear that he'll get in trouble for starting the entire Sora war.
I don't know nothing!
But in the courtroom, while Bluey was testifying, he finally fesses up and takes the fall to prevent his friends from getting blamed, which is a resolution I like. I just don't think I quite felt like they had earned Butters' change of heart here. He was pretty defiant the entire episode, and I wish we had maybe gotten a moment where he reflects before this.
This all started with me! Because my heart was broken!
Even with this admission though, he remains defiant that Red deserved what she got, which again is a real juxtaposition from the Butters we saw back in Raisins. I wonder if he's going to continue down this path moving forward, or if he'll ever reel it back into his sweeter, more optimistic territory. I don't know though, I guess Red Pill Butters might be the future. But Butters also tips off the cops about the Cartman Sora videos, which of course perfectly leads them to the wrong conclusion, that Peter Thiel is Totoro, leading to his arrest.
But no magical cat bus is gonna whisk you away from justice this time.
Which is, of course, funny. I just wasn't sure I felt like it all wove together as seamlessly as I'd have liked it to, particularly as this felt like them sort of bailing themselves out of the Peter Thiel dead end that they kind of wrote themselves into. Cartman was expectedly furious at his mom. I mean, Leanne never really catches a break, does she?
When is the last time I even ate a pot pie, you dumb bitch?
I do love that in this case, the cops actually did find the proper outcome in their investigation, saving Cartman. They just reached that conclusion, taking the 100% wrong route. They did their job poorly at every step and stumbled into the right resolution. Damn, we haven't even touched the Trump side of the episode yet either. And honestly, this was an interesting one, I'd say. This felt the most like the Trump x Satan side of things was there to mostly move the serialized plot forward, and a little bit less to do commentary on the Trump administration. Pretty much every other episode this season has commented on some aspect of Trump's administration in a critical way. This one, a little bit less so. That isn't to say there wasn't any commentary. The end, in particular, definitely has things to say, which we'll get to, but the story across the episode was much more focused on the JD Vance and Trump relationship after learning that Vance was manipulating Trump to try and get rid of the baby, which is something Trump learns off screen, actually. I think this is all definitely in aid of the Antichrist story wrap-up coming in the final 2 episodes, because it feels very stage-setty, along with the fact that it sort of feels like they were pruning the whole Thiel/Cartman side of the plot for a possibly cleaner setup so that the stories intertwine well in the finale. But obviously the biggest development here is Trump and JD Vance exploring each other's bodies, which was one of those things that I found very funny and then also immediately wanted to bleach from my brain. Honestly, that actually describes a lot of this episode. But the thing that was definitely funniest and most effective for me here was the way Fox News was so depressed when Thiel's surveillance footage of Trump and Vance leaked.
Why the president would do this to Satan with a baby on the way, we don't know.
And unfortunately, this is not only reflective of things we're already seeing, but of what we can probably expect moving forward. There was already an instance of a weird video shot at the White House showing somebody throwing something out of one of the second floor White House windows, and Trump went on record claiming it was an AI faked video. And this is just guaranteed to be one of his go-to moves moving forward, and networks like Fox are definitely going to enable it.
It's fake?
Yeah, that's all Sora too! That's all fake!
Oh, it's fake!
Overall, I am actually a little mixed on this episode, because on one hand, the Sora, Gen AI, and police storyline was among my favorites of the season. That was top tier stuff, but I did feel like it maybe left a bit to be desired in terms of how the entire episode came together. The Cartman/Thiel storyline felt sort of like it was in the way of them telling a more coherent story about Gen AI, and the Trump/Vance stuff felt a little bit separate the whole time as well. It also kind of felt like a missed opportunity for me here. This seemed like a really good chance to put a focus on on Trump and the Epstein list. Given that all of the Sora 2 stuff in this episode was about fictional characters and kids, it kind of feels like a natural place they could have crossed over the whole Trump claims incriminating evidence is just AI thing in an even more fitting way. Though maybe it's a good thing that they saved the Epstein possibilities given the new email releases this week. We'll see if they touch on that. I did like this episode, despite some of my criticisms and misgivings. The heights of the Gen AI storyline made it feel pretty worth it to me overall, and I am hopeful that with their sort of story pruning they did, that they'll have a clear runway to land the plane that is this bizarre season of South Park. It would be really cool to be able to rewatch and look back on the entire season and feel more fondly about even the story decisions I didn't love at the time. South Park's penultimate episode of the year was also a Thanksgiving special, and definitely felt more like a classic town-wide romp than many of our 2025 episodes so far. But despite being a nice town-focused holiday story, they brought a ton of different aspects from various episodes this season together, and obviously still hit with some social and political commentary, despite giving us the absolute least amount of Trump we've gotten in any new episode since the season began. This felt to me like the most grounded and classic-feeling episode we've gotten in a minute, so let's dive into Season 28, Episode 4, Turkey Trot. The opening of the episode is a pretty fun sort of town check-in scene as the Chamber of Commerce tries to determine how they'll fund this year's Turkey Trot. It sort of runs down a few aspects of different episodes of the year within this one scene, first referencing the fact that Randy used to be able to sponsor the event via Tegrity.
But as you know, we've recently all lost Tegrity.
This also checks in on Liu Kim and his Asian pop-up store, reminding people how he's still dealing with tariffs. And then our first check-in on Mackie since Gotta Nut, which had such a vague ending that people weren't even sure if he ever made it back to South Park. But as it turns out, he's now a janitor at the South Park Chamber of Commerce. I wonder if they had maybe considered what to do with Mackie after the unclear ending to the second episode, but couldn't land on anything interesting, and then maybe decided to give us this check-in before the finale. But this all also ties into this episode's story and commentary pretty cleanly, as despite having a job, Mackie, along with just about everyone else, are all struggling to make ends meet in South Park. Which brings us to the new sponsor for the Turkey Trot.
They're giving money to everyone else. Why not us?
So, yep, it's Saudi Arabia. They come in and they offer a $5,000 prize for the South Park Turkey Trot. This is obviously referencing a couple things. For one, the fact that Saudi Arabia's public investment fund has been potentially bidding on the sale of Warner Brothers, the studio, which is insane. And of course, the recently maligned Riyadh Comedy Festival, in which the Saudi Arabian government paid handsomely to get a ton of comedians over there for their event, with a lot of those comedians being intensely scrutinized for taking money from such a dubious and morally corrupt source. Obviously, the way the episode portrays this isn't a one-to-one comparison, because frankly, basically every one of those comedians that went to Riyadh was already doing just fine. They did not need the Saudi Arabian money. But this episode basically concedes that everyone in South Park is struggling so immensely that they're willing to look the other way in order to win that money.
If anybody's gonna get money from Saudi Arabia, it should be us.
This also feels like it parallels what we saw in the Halloween episode, with Stan being so willing to go through with the crypto rug pull scheme and make some money off of other people for himself, really showcasing dubious morals to pull himself out of the tough position that he and his family are in. But obviously this time it extends to countless other people in South Park. There were actually some really interesting things to note in the Turkey Trot sign-up sequence. Obviously they're showcasing characters from previous episodes this year, like Mackie and Liu Kim. We even got a wing cameo during the Turkey Trot, but we also see Jimbo sign up with Ned, who is in a wheelchair and sports these major scars on his face. This is really interesting because it's sort of retconning a retcon that keeps going back and forth. In season 22's Time to Get Cereal, Ned is mauled by Man Bear Pig. The last we see him in that season is in Bike Parade, in a wheelchair, sporting the same pattern of these wounds here, though they haven't scarred over yet. But then later, we see Ned in a crowd shot at the end of the vaccination special, celebrating with no wheelchair or wounds. Then, we see him at Shady Acres retirement in the post-COVID special, which obviously takes place in the future. He's just in a few background shots, but it appears that he is both in a wheelchair and he has remnants of the scarring on his face still, though they have faded quite a bit. This is also an older character model, obviously. But then, in the episode Japanese Toilet, he appears looking normal in a crowd shot during Stan's speech near the end of the episode. I think ultimately the answer to the back and forth is that for these big crowd scene shots, animators inserted Ned as a filler character without anyone realizing the continuity continuity issue. But this is now a brand new character model for Ned, the first time we've seen current day Ned in the wheelchair with these wounds having scarred over, which I expect also means this is going to be the definitive model for Ned moving forward. A pretty neat detail. Honestly, I never even noticed this continuity in post-COVID before this episode. I went back and did the research for this and was kind of blown away. I wasn't even sure we had seen him at all after Bike Parade, which is fair because he's kind of hidden in all of these shots. Alright, let's get out of that South Park lore hole and back to the episode. This one also follows a semi-classic South Park pattern. Cartman presuming something racist about Tolkien. I mean, we've seen this many times in episodes like Cartman Finds Love or Christian Rock Hard.
Token, how many times do we have to go through this? You're black, you can play bass. I'm getting sick of your stereotypes.
This time, Cartman decides that they need to get Tolkien on their turkey trot team because obviously he is a good runner, and he describes his expertise in this kind of science pretty specifically here.
I happen to be an expert in race science, you guys.
It's actually kind of crazy that this was the first episode released after my friend Toonrific Tariq dropped his big 50-minute video on Tolkien. He broke down all the ways the show has used him over the years, and it's an incredibly great video. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it, but it's pretty funny to immediately deliver a kind of by-the-numbers use of Tolkien right after his video that's breaking down exactly how they've done this over the years. Once again, making me wonder if Matt and Trey watch these videos. Despite Tolkien insisting he's not a runner, he eventually agrees to join the boys' team. And all things considered, this episode really does feel like it's both building really naturally on the various plot points of this entire season and delivering some classic-feeling South Park storylines. A town-wide event that leads to Cartman making dubious and racist schemes. I mean, that's classic South Park, right? Particularly after a season that has devoted nearly half of each episode to the ongoing Trump and Satan storyline. Speaking of, I think this one did a really great job tying the Trump stuff in naturally while refraining from taking us away from the South Park focus. This episode put a spotlight on Pete Hegseth and Trump's quote-unquote Department of War. Hegseth heads to South Park to try and get Peter Thiel out of prison after he was previously arrested, and they really tear into Hegseth here. And I don't know how you can blame them. I mean, is there any more of an insecure move than renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War? Hegseth has seemed to have turned off a lot of military with his antics, and South Park opts here to showcase his try-hard attitude and obsession with creating influencer-like content to post on the official administration social media pages, which is a real thing. Just go check out the Department of War Twitter. I cannot believe the world we live in.
We don't stand down for anyone. Be sure to like and subscribe. All right, let's do this.
So our only real connection to Trump in this episode is that he has sent one of his stooges into South Park. We only see Trump on a brief phone call, which to me worked really well. It made sure to tie to that ongoing storyline to a degree, while also maintaining that focus on the town shenanigans. Now, the South Park police's antics are always undoubtedly funny, and this was once again a great example of this, as they just fully put Hegseth on his ass. I don't normally cheer for the South Park police, but this is an instance where I'm kind of taking their side. Pretty funny that they just have absolutely zero respect for his authority. And the way all of these storylines coalesce feels pretty fun and natural as well. Obviously, the big event is the turkey trot itself, with the entire town trying to get that 5K from the Saudis. But Hegseth sees an opportunity when he completely misreads what the turkey trot is.
Holy shit, we've got an Antifa uprising!
I also liked that they looped Kristi Noem back into this one, connecting back to the earlier part of the season, leading to a sort of influencer dick measuring contest between Hegseth and Noem. The only character with any real integrity in this episode is actually Tolkien. He just doesn't show up to the turkey trot because he doesn't feel right about potentially taking money from the Saudis. Literally everybody else in the episode jumps at the chance, but Tolkien sits it out. The way Cartman tries to justify it is fully commentary on how some of the comedians that went to the Riyadh Festival tried to justify their own participation, while also taking a swipe at said comedians.
Saudi Arabia is out paying for sporting events? They're not out hacking up reporters and inviting Pete Davidson to come do comedy.
Cartman's plan just devolves into stealing Tolkien's Xbox to lure him to the turkey trot. Funny side note, anyone else think it's bizarre that they used an Xbox 360 model here? I mean, we know they at least designed an Xbox One model for the Black Friday trilogy. Using a 360 in 2025 is wild. That specific model is literally 20 years old. But I feel like the Trot was a really great event/location for all of these things to come together. Obviously, the entire town competing desperately to get that money, Cartman luring Tolkien to the event, Hegseth tear-gassing the runners thinking they're Antifa. It is pretty interesting how the show has kind of systematically run down the list of every major figure in the Trump administration and just dismantled them. And it's particularly interesting how vastly different their commentary and satire of each person has been. But I liked that this was just a plain old attack on this guy's character. He is such a tryhard, and they exemplified that in their portrayal, ending in their Danger Zone parody. Pete Hegseth is a fucking douche. Not a particularly creative parody, but accurate. The absolute highlight of the climax here for me is how the turkey trot ended. Tolkien proved that he actually wasn't a good runner, but still, in the mess of tear gas as he backed away from Cartman with his Xbox, just accidentally won the entire thing.
Oh, God. Damn it.
Tolkien was literally the only person in the entire town who took any kind of moral stance against the Saudi backing of the turkey trot, and in the end, he won and collected the check. I truly laughed so hard at how angry he is up on stage as they hand him that giant check. The Hegseth story didn't particularly wrap up in an exciting way, but again, I enjoyed seeing Yates kind of just kick his ass into jail, placing him with heel, and probably setting the stage for part of the finale to a degree. Overall, I feel like this episode actually did exactly what I'd been hoping to see out of this season almost the entirety of the year. This is a great town and kid-focused story. It had natural implementation of some of the ongoing Trump stuff without taking away the focus from the town, and it gave us a really fun classic Cartman and Tolkien standoff. However, they also made this move with only a single episode remaining, which is an interesting choice. I would have really expected them to have been table setting for the big serialized finale, in which I am certain we can expect the birth of the Antichrist, and there are definitely still some big pieces on the table. In a way, this episode sort of brought a lot of the town-focused storylines together, not as some sort of big climax, but as a way to tie them together via commentary, and I expect this season finale will be the one that really lays out the end of this serialized Trump, Satan, Antichrist story. I am still fully expecting it to revolve around not just the Trump administration White House stuff, but hopefully also Jesus. Since the last we saw him, he had completely transformed into Power Christian mode. He needs to have a sort of moral resurrection, we'll call it, in order to come out of this weird bunk he's in. I expect Thiel and Hegseth being in South Park jail will facilitate the sort of showdown of everything in South Park, and I'm still curious if the whole Cartman 6-7 possession thing will play a part with Thiel and the Antichrist story. There's a lot of pieces here, and they might ignore some of them, we'll see. This has just been a really interesting season, and it's felt like Matt and Trey have sort of been trying to balance their preference for classic South Park stories and their stubborn heels in the sand attitude in regards to all of their anti-extremist rhetoric, with obviously their stubbornness sort of winning out most of the time. But I sort of always respect their interplay with the audience and attempts to go the path that speaks to them most, even if I have maybe found the Trump focus pretty exhausting this year. But I think a strong finale could really make me feel positively overall about this season. It seems like the stage is set and the pieces are in place for something that could be really satisfying. Well, we've finally reached the end of probably the most bizarre and unorthodox season of South Park of all time. Or 2 seasons if you want to get technical. Another thing that adds to aforementioned bizarreness. But with the serialized Satan x Trump storyline set to come to a close, and a handful of other lingering story threads both within the town of South Park and in their satirization of Trump's administration, the question has always been whether or not they'd be able to bring it all together for a satisfying conclusion. And with the season being pretty controversial amongst fans, and having so many disparate story elements still on the board, I think a lot of the fan base has been asking, what the hell is going on?
What's going on is the most exquisitely woven tapestry of ideas that you've ever seen, man.
So now, after 2025's final South Park episode, a finale that not only weaves together these stories, but throws a few fun fan-favorite curveballs into the mix as well, let's dive into Season 28, Episode 5, The Crap Out. So as we've covered over the course of the year, a lot of these new episodes have sort of been in metatextual conversation with the audience, something Matt and Trey have been known to do from time to time. And this one kind of just starts off right away, seemingly acknowledging how some people are feeling about the new season.
The past few months have just been really awful.
Now, obviously, this is also just breaking down all the crazy stuff that has happened in South Park and to the characters, but Stan was previously also that metatextual conduit in The Woman in the Hat with the whole South Park sucks now shtick. And this entire conversation is to the school counselor, who is of course now Power Christian Jesus. And this is the first we've seen from Jesus since he embraced that PC role. And it was admittedly pretty funny to see him in action. I love that he just has 3 electric guitars in his office. But Stan lays out basically his wants for this finale, with Jesus calling Stan's desires for a Christmas miracle socialist bullshit.
I don't know what's made you change like this, but we need some goddamn Christmas magic!
Interestingly, Stan is the only one of the 4 boys in this finale, which is a strange choice for sure, but one that I do think sort of worked. Stan certainly seemed to be struggling the most out of any of our main characters this season, and was definitely the character with the most lingering story points surrounding him. So I didn't really mind that it was sort of a solo Stan Christmas story that also wraps up the ongoing ongoing serialized elements. Speaking of, after this, it jumps to the next most important character in the finale, Satan, who, much like Stan, has had a more difficult time this season. I enjoyed this Christmas song he sings as he preps for the baby to be born. It's probably the happiest we've seen Satan the entire season, which is of course short-lived as he learns that Trump and Vance have skipped town to try and bail Hegseth and Teal out of Park County Jail. This episode not only does a solid job tying in a lot of those ongoing stories, but even just acknowledging some of the other season stories via dialogue. Stan mentions the money they got from Saudi Arabia in the Turkey Trot episode in his conversation with Jesus, and while Trump and Vance are undercover, Mackie sort of checks in on his struggles as he sort of represents the collective struggles of the American people and their issues making ends meet this year. He is still just a janitor at City Hall, it seems, but this is when the episode throws a pretty huge curveball into the mix, in a really funny way. Obviously, this is the season's Christmas episode, and any South Park fan is at least half expecting Mr. Hanky to show up in any given Christmas story. With Stan looking for a miracle and Jesus not helping at all, they tease a Mr. Hanky return, with Stan looking into the toilet, begging for a miracle, only to subvert those expectations with the Christmas critters of all people. Now, obviously, this is a very fun and welcomed return for longtime fans of the show. Woodland Critter Christmas is a beloved Christmas episode, and given their previous story, alongside the impending birth of the Antichrist, it's a natural fit here. But obviously, it also doesn't really make sense, and Stan says as much.
This doesn't make any sense. You guys are just something that Cartman made up in his head.
Now, forgive the overanalysis, but this is the first time the Christmas critters have been portrayed as like real beings in South Park. Previously, they were in Cartman's Christmas story, and then they were seen again in Imagination Land because Cartman had imagined them. And in that episode, they were, of course, beings, but they were also, of course, imaginary. But this isn't the first time the show has introduced real versions of characters who were previously shown to be imaginary in the Imagination Land trilogy. The Man-Bear-Pig model we know and love was introduced in that trilogy as well, before being revealed to be a real being in season 22's Time to Get Cereal, and then appearing again in the Streaming Wars. Not to mention that Jesus' imaginary form was a big part of that trilogy, when he's also canonically been real for the entirety of South Park. Though, I guess also, if I really think about it, we did see seemingly real versions of the Woodland Critters back in the Fractured But Whole, the video game, in an alternate future, if I recall correctly. It was a really fun boss battle, so I guess this is kind of technically the second time we have seen quote-unquote real Woodland Critters. Ultimately, Matt and Trey tend to play fast and loose with canon if it serves the story, and usually that is the right move.
Are you really gonna overanalyze a crap out?
Yeah, overanalyzing is kind of my job, but I definitely got more joy out of seeing the Christmas critters again than being a stickler and adhering to the canon, especially with the Antichrist connection. And it was also fun that this made it feel like a real successor to Woodland Critter Christmas, or at least to the story that Cartman told in Woodland Critter Christmas, which was also a solo Stan Christmas adventure, just him and the critters, none of the other boys. Though, while fun, I am not entirely sure the critters' presence in this episode added a ton outside of vibes and nostalgia, because ultimately they didn't do a ton. I guess they sort of just helped guide Stan on his journey. But basically, right at the midway point of this episode is when everything starts to coalesce and interweave. Satan starts to get suspicious of Trump while doing laundry. Towley, who we know has seen everything, confirms Satan's suspicions, and they go to confront him in South Park. Honestly, because there were so many different story elements coming together, none of them got a ton of focus or anything, but they did all weave together pretty effectively, I thought.
Nothing can stop the Antichrist from coming. Except, of course, for Peter Thiel.
I really enjoyed the critters' genuine fear of Peter Thiel here, and I felt like Satan's confrontation of Trump was a strong midpoint for the episode, pitting the two sides of the chessboard against each other and really bringing all the disparate story points together for the first time. I also found it pretty funny that we as the audience are basically cheering for Satan to give birth to the Antichrist in opposition to Jesus. It's just a hilarious Christmas subversion, classic South Park right there. And South Park has always made Satan an empathetic figure anyways. Power Christian Jesus is the wild card here. I enjoyed that he's got these new American rock guitar powers that can basically just do anything he needs, teleport, explode open the side of the police station, unlock a jail cell. But I also found this even funnier because it implies that Jesus sort sort of has more practical powers in his power Christian mode than he does typically, given that Fantastic Easter Special was pretty clear that Jesus only has powers in death. But the big showdown was sort of, I think pretty intentionally, anticlimactic. I liked Stan's sort of realization and journey, acknowledging that though he might not get his own Christmas miracle, he might be able to make sure Satan's Christmas miracle happens. But I also think that Stan's realization pushing Jesus to realize the error of his ways maybe felt a bit quick. It was definitely the plot point I wanted in this episode, but I think him going from breaking into the hospital with Trump and co to immediately reverting could have maybe had like one additional beat to make the turn feel fuller. Regardless, it was still the plot point I needed in this episode, and it works even better given the end of the episode, but we'll get there. This is sort of a weird episode to talk about because there's not a ton of commentary throughout. It's mostly just tying up all the loose threads from the ongoing season, and as a fan of the show, I enjoy that stuff a lot, but as a guy on YouTube who overanalyzes the show, the commentary gives me the most to dig into. Though, luckily, I think this resolution is probably some of the most interesting and biting commentary in the entire season, in a dark way, all built around the reveal of what happens to the Antichrist, which is crazy.
The baby got a hold of some bed sheets. There's a couple minutes missing from the ultrasound, but it's definitely a suicide.
Okay, so obviously the allusion here is to what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, who nobody in their right mind believes killed himself, particularly given the mysterious missing security cam footage that was edited out during the supposed suicide. And I think alluding to that here is pretty funny and poignant. Within the story of this season, Trump has been desperately trying to avoid the consequences of his actions by getting rid of his and Satan's baby. And in the end, he absolutely avoids all of those consequences and even comes out on top. And there's a pretty clear parallel to what potential consequences could have befallen Trump had Epstein not been mysteriously disappeared. And I think it's also pretty clear commentary that despite an entire season showcasing all of Trump's corruption, his conflicts of interest, his countless shortcomings, the season basically ends with him partying in celebration. Of course, he came out on top because the show punishing Trump for his actions would have been pure fantasy. I'm sure this will leave many fans fearful that the door is open for more Trump shenanigans in the future, but I expect we will not get a season quite like this one ever again, though I guess we'll have to wait and see. I did like how it gave a bittersweet ending for Satan here. The scene where he packs up all the Christmas baby stuff he so excitedly set up earlier in the episode is genuinely sad, but he also leaves the White House without looking back. He is actually free now. And then, of course, we've got the happy ending for Stan, and this really is his Christmas miracle because it genuinely has no real explanation. Jesus gifts him his house back, and everything is just fully back to normal, which I think many fans of the show have got to be so excited to see. Stan has not lived in this house since season 22. Literally 2018 was the last time we saw the Marsh family in this house. 7 years of integrity later, and now they're finally back. But interestingly, there are still plenty of status quo changes that have not reverted. Yeah, Jesus got his redemption, but it also implies that he's still committed to his new wife. As far as we know, Jesus will still be the school counselor, as Mackie hasn't gotten his job back, at least yet. PC principal is still in full power Christian mode. The Marshes got their house back, but we still don't know anything about Randy's career or any new job, so there are definitely just lots of big question marks going into next year, even if they've largely reverted the big things back to the old status quo. I do think I liked this season finale for a lot of reasons, but I am also still on the fence as to whether or not I felt like it really justified how this season played out. It was a pretty fun and satisfying way to weave the season together, and probably did a more thorough job than some of the other more serialized seasons have, but I do think a lot of the fans' exhaustion from the use of Trump and his administration is pretty fair. I genuinely enjoyed the commentary and still felt myself just pining for classic South Park stories, and it feels like with the way they concluded this season, they do just have a clean slate to actually return to those stories. Does that mean I expect we'll never see Trump again? No, I'm guessing they'll probably use him in similar ways that presidents have been used in the past, or maybe like the later Garrison Trump seasons where he was sometimes a part of the story but mostly not. But the fact that they have completely removed integrity and left only a few lingering status quo shifts gives them a lot of opportunity to return to those classic feeling stories. And to be fair, this season did have some great classic feeling episodes that also just happened to be paired with Trump Satan stuff. It was like half of certain episodes felt classic, while the other half of those episodes felt like they were just beating a dead horse. So it will be really interesting to see how these things shake out moving forward. Alright, so obviously this was not the season or seasons of South Park that anybody expected. On both a production and story level, this was about as different as a South Park season has ever been. And the unprecedented aspects of the season started months before they even released an episode, when Comedy Central released a season 27 quote-unquote teaser trailer, a teaser I made an entire breakdown for speculating about the upcoming episodes. A teaser trailer that, as it turns out, was just filled with off-the-cuff episode ideas they threw together for the network with no intention of following through on.
You seriously think we went and made a bunch of shows ahead of time and we're like banking them for later? Like, we've never done that.
Granted, this wasn't the first time a South Park promo had misled fans. The return of Lemmywinks comes to mind, but it certainly was a big surprise to a lot of fans, including myself. And then, obviously, there was that big decision in the premiere not to return to Garrison as the Trump stand-in, and instead to basically give Trump the Saddam Hussein treatment. And to be fair, they had already hinted that they didn't want to put Garrison back in the White House with the season 26 episode Spring Break back in 2023, so it wasn't a huge surprise that they found a way to keep him in South Park. However, late last year, Matt and Trey had pretty explicitly said that they were sick of Trump, sick of covering Trump, and this obviously made his appearance in all 10 episodes of the new season pretty surprising. On top of that, they didn't really even give us Garrison, despite retaining him on the normal character roster. It was also interesting to bring back Satan here. Obviously, they did this due to his previous connection to Saddam Hussein, but the last we had seen Satan, he had literally died, ascending to heaven after trying to save the world from Man Bear Pig. A great moment in that episode, and frankly something I would have loved to have seen followed up on. A story of Satan in heaven sounds pretty good, but I also understand why they ignored that here. Honestly, Satan got nearly as much screen time this year as he had in the entire history of South Park prior to this. This season also made some major shake-up decisions with characters, story, and lore. PC Principal shifted from being politically correct to being power Christian, and maybe most impactfully, they finally had Randy and the Marsh family leave Tegrity Farms, something they were defiantly stubborn about for like 7 years. And then there is of course the serialization of it all. After seasons 18 through 24 dabbled in varying degrees of serialized storytelling, seasons 25 and 26, along with many of the Paramount specials, felt like a very intentional return to more episodic storytelling. But this year, they just dove headfirst into that Trump x Satan serialization that acted as a through line for all 10 episodes, which again was very unexpected given the last 2 seasons. But the strangest aspects of this year of South Park mostly come down to events outside of the narrative and have a lot more to do with its production. For one, they were in heated negotiations for their new streaming deal amidst the controversial Skydance Paramount merger, and these negotiations ended up taking so long that the new season was actually delayed from its planned release date of July 9th. In fact, a deal was struck literally just 2 days before the new season did eventually air, striking July 21st and the season premiering July 23rd. Speaking of unprecedented, the streaming deal itself was absolutely insane and unheard of. 5 years and $1.5 billion, and that was just the streaming rights. It didn't even include the eventual renewal of their contracts to make new episodes. And while South Park has always been known to make waves in the news cycle across its history with its biting social and political commentary, I personally don't remember anything close to the shockwaves unleashed by the deepfake Trump ad from the end of Sermon on the Mount, the season premiere. I mean, for one, I have never had any video I've ever made gain viewership as quickly as that video did. My mother, who has never watched South Park in her life, asked me about it. It all felt truly insane. And obviously, with the absolute uproar caused by this new episode, all eyes were on Matt and Trey for how they would follow it up. And luckily, they took the stage at Comic-Con the very next day and gave a little insight into what we should expect.
Dude, I don't know what the episode is next week. It's super stressful.
Okay, so yeah, in typical South Park fashion, they were going that 7 days to air route. That's not surprising, but this maybe should have been our first hint that something was slightly off, because ultimately, they actually landed on moving to a release schedule of a new episode every 2 weeks. This was, of course, completely unprecedented. Though the team would often take the odd week off here and there in the middle of a run to give them a bit of breathing room, moving fully to an every other week schedule was completely unheard of, possibly spurred on by adjusting to the working conditions versions of the previous Paramount special model that gave them a bit more time and flexibility to deliver. And while interest did maintain for the first few episodes of the season, given the explosive premiere, I do think that the bi-monthly release schedule kind of harmed the awareness and hype surrounding the show over the course of the year. While it still got plenty of fan attention, it definitely dwindled a bit after those first 2 episodes. But even with the extra production time for every single episode, another unprecedented thing happened this year. For the first time in South Park history, they missed an episode release date simply because they did not finish the episode on time. Previously, they had missed the deadline because of a power outage, but not because they just didn't get the work done. Matt and Trey released this statement after they missed the date. "Apparently, when you do everything at the last minute, sometimes you don't get it done. This one's on us. We didn't get it done in time. Thanks to Comedy Central and South Park fans for being so understanding. Tune in next week." This probably would not have been met with all that much of a reaction if it weren't for the fact that they had already doubled production time this year, so this made a 3-week gap between episodes instead of 2, and the fact that this was the first episode following the assassination of Charlie Kirk. South Park had parodied Kirk just a few weeks prior to his death, and nearly everybody was expecting them to address this somehow. Many people even speculated that Matt and Trey had actually finished an episode about Charlie Kirk and were told they couldn't air it, with the 1-week delay obviously fueling the speculation. Some people still believe this, but they were definitely never planning to cover that, and if they had been and they had been denied this possibility, we would have never heard the end of it from Matt and Trey. They are not shy about bitching when they get told no. When they missed this deadline, they released a schedule citing when fans could expect new episodes for the rest of the year, which also included another 3-week gap after the 5th episode. Speaking of, following that 5th episode, we got another weird curveball. The 6th episode of the year was not released as season 27 episode 6, instead being released as season 28 episode 1, meaning on paper, this year delivered 2 separate 5-episode seasons, even though it could not be clearer that these were all part of a single run of 10 episodes. There's been a lot of speculation about why this happened, from contractual obligations to the way their new deal was retooled, but according to The Hollywood Reporter, a rep at South Park claimed that they intended it to be 2 5-episode seasons this year all along. If I were going to venture a guess as to why they planned this, I would say this was done to tidy up the messy production schedule of the past few years to make it a bit cleaner going forward. Since the show skipped out on a traditional numbered season for 2024, this meant that season 27 was airing on their 28th year. But now, by splitting this season in 2, season 28 ends on their 28th year. This would mean that in a couple of years, their 30th anniversary can actually coincide with a 30th season. It would be kinda awkward to drop season 29 on their 30th anniversary celebration. So this is my presumption as to why they did this. But again, it's just another thing that makes this a weird, messy year of South Park. And it didn't really end there. The second episode of quote-unquote season 28 was the show's Halloween episode, The Woman in the Hat, and though they had previously, in writing, promised that this episode would be delivered on Wednesday, October 29th, they actually took 2 extra days and delivered it on Halloween, October 31st, the following Friday. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time an episode of South Park has ever premiered outside of its Wednesday time slot in the history of the show. It's funny how the moment they started fudging the schedule a little bit to fit their needs, they kind of just started to go wild with it. But interestingly, for all of this year's curveballs, unprecedented story and production decisions, and things that felt so different for South Park, this season also clearly made such an effort to sort of move things back to normal for the show, or as normal as possible, I guess. Obviously, there was the messaging in The Woman in the Hat, with Stan sort of acting as the fan stand-in, wishing South Park didn't suck anymore, with the episode sort of landing on the message that, yeah, it kinda sucks that this is what it is right now, but it won't always be this. And with the big final emotional button of the entire season being Stan getting his old house back, putting his family there for the first time since 2018, that feels like a major step towards a resurgence in those classic South Park romps, or at least we can hope that's the plan. Man, I'm gonna be honest, when new episodes started in July, the last thing I expected was to be covering the new season still midway through December, but it has been a weird year all around, let's be real. I think when we're looking back on these 10 episodes in the future, seasons 27 and 28 are absolutely going to stand out as the strangest and messiest in South Park history, whether or not the episodes age well. Honestly, writing out all of these strange occurrences from this year's production had me remembering things I had already forgotten happened simply because of the sheer volume of strange things that happened this year. Personally, though I may not have loved that we stuck with the Trump stuff all season, I do think there's a lot to love in this set of episodes, and I personally don't expect that we'll be getting another season that that is this Trump-heavy next year. If you look at those 4 Garrison Trump seasons, their use of the character diminished as they went on, and it even felt like they used him more often, mostly because he was Garrison. It will certainly be interesting to see how things pan out moving forward. With their latest deal, we've got 40 more episodes to look forward to over the next 4 years, which should bring us to season 32 if they don't shake things up again, and I'm particularly looking forward to seeing how they celebrate that 30th anniversary. But regardless of how this all shakes out, I don't think there will ever be a weirder season of South Park.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.